So, hello to everybody who is tuning in to the David 67 Celtic News live stream for Thursday, the 9th of July. A few people already making comments, some speculation as to what kind of clothes I'm going to be wearing today. So today is a Celtic t-shirt, a Lisbon 1967 t-shirt. So it's not the Bumblebee outfit from last week. It's not anything more interesting or exotic than that. So great to see some people in already. Great to have you on, Michael Ross. Slabbering Cabbage back as well. Alison Timpany. Alison Timpany speculating, do you think that England will be shouting for Morocco? I think obviously the getting into the quarter-final stage, England have, I think, quite a difficult game to beat Norway, who've been really, really good form. Argentina look good in the other half of the draw to meet England in the semi-finals. France in the top half look like they're probably going to play against Spain in the other semi-final. I think France look like the quality team so far of the competition. So, thank you, Michael Ross. I was a couple of minutes late for starting the live stream, which is about usual for Par. But given the fact we do go on usually for about 3 hours to 4 hours, being a couple of minutes late to start with I think is excusable. So, good evening to you, Chipper67. Yep. So great to have you on Slabbing Cabbage. Great to have you on Rubber Duck. No, the t-shirt was clean on this morning. So lovely to have many of the regulars. Oh, great to have you on as well, Kenneth Todd. To answer your question, say, are this board backing Martin? I think the board are backing Martin. I think there's lots of irons in the fire, to use an old-fashioned term. I think there's a lot of deals and negotiations. The difficult thing at the moment for me is that the difficult thing for me is the fact that I think quite a lot of teams aren't going into proper negotiations and transfers because a lot of the bigger teams have still got their players away at the World Cup. Quite a lot of big teams in England, big teams around Europe haven't done very much transfer dealings at all. I do wonder whether the lack of any proper bids so far for Engels, for Dyson Maeda, might be the fact that Dyson Maeda is away at was away at the World Cup. He's now on his summer holidays. Also, two of the clubs said to be in for Engels have just recently got new managers, Nottingham Forest and Fulham. So lots and lots of teams reportedly looking at Maeda, looking at Engels, but nobody seems to have put in a proper bid for any of those people, and certainly nothing that's meeting Celtic's valuations. And there was talk about that Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney, etc., were trying to have a chat with Dyson Maeda to see whether he wants to stay, because there was some speculation from some of the interviews that Maeda might have particularly enjoyed the end of the season with Celtic and was looking to try again in Europe and the Champions League. So to answer Kenneth Todd's question, I think they are backing Martin O'Neill. I think he's now got the coaching staff around him. I think the addition of Ross Grant from Hearts is a really good move. We've signed Oxlade-Chamberlain. We've signed Camilo Duran, although that hasn't actually been announced. There are strong rumours that Celtic are looking at a potential big bid for Kieran Bowie to bring him back from Italian football. His team got relegated to Serie B last season, so the speculation is that Kieran Bowie will be moving on either to a Serie A team or maybe moving back to England or Scotland, etc. Because obviously Kieran Bowie was playing in England before he went to Hibs, before he went to Italy. So, and it's thought that if Celtic were to put in a bid for Kieran Bowie, which is a possibility, it would be about £13 million. So, to answer your question, yes. Rubber Duck making good point. Duran spotted training with the squad. So the indications are Camilo Duran passed his medical on Tuesday and Wednesday, flew out to Portugal to join the rest of the squad on Wednesday or Thursday, and then he was part of the second training session of the day. So, and apparently he's going to be wearing number 11 as his shirt number for the season. Quite why Celtic haven't announced the actual signing. It may be they're going to announce the signing and do the interviews across in Portugal. But it certainly was good to see him part of the squad, mixing in with the players. Could also see Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain as part of the squad. I think it's a good short-term signing with Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. I think he will be a better player this season than he was last season, because he'll have the benefit of going through a full pre-season and get his fitness and so on back to. Alison Timpany speculating that it could be Camilo Duran's visas that holding things up. That's certainly a possibility. I hadn't really thought of that. There was strangely a comment from the Azerbaijani embassy saying that it was brilliant to see a player from Azerbaijan's league joining a major league in Europe. So I hadn't really thought about the possibility. Obviously, with Camilo Duran being a Colombian by birth, there certainly will be work permits and visas and stuff to work out. Hadn't really thought. That's a very good point. That might be another reason for Ernest Mosley saying, why did we not get Bowie for 6 million in January, 13 million way over the top? I think unfortunately that's the way with football. My understanding was that Bowie didn't want to move to Celtic. He wanted to move to Europe rather than coming to Celtic. So I think it's all just speculation. I think Celtic might well make inquiries whether Kieran Bowie wants to come back to Scotland, and the answer might well be no, because there are 2 or 3 Serie A teams who are happy to pay the 13 million, and Kieran Bowie, I think, is keen to continue his career in Italy rather than coming back to Scotland. So my understanding was that Bowie didn't want to come to Celtic. He wanted to move back to England or wanted to move to Central Europe, and he got his wish by moving to Verona. Verona unfortunately got relegated. Good evening to you as well. 1888, Yvonne G and Gavi Boy as well. Lots and lots of the regulars. No signs of Sligo Boy under any of his various different variations of his name. So, Papa Leo, I know it was just a friendly, but you can see it's certainly at times it did look like Celtic were trying to move the ball quicker. I did like, I think getting the ball over the top and into Callum Osman worked quite well in the first half. Getting the ball out to Thomas Hatton in the second half worked really well. I thought Maeda looked pretty decent. I thought Mikel Ong-Balakwisha had some nice touches. I thought Callum McGregor at times I thought slowed the game down too much against Shelbourne, but at times he was trying to get the ball forward. I think the main thing for me was the fact that in the first half, it was half the first team and half the B team academy. And then the same in the second half, it was the other half of the first team and the other half of the B team and the academy team. So just it felt like a lot of players weren't quite sure how each person beside them was going to react and what runs they were going to do and stuff. So I thought there were quite a lot of okay signs. And one of the best things for me was the fact that Cameron Carter-Vickers he looked fit, he looked fresh, he looked full of energy. Not that he had actually terribly much to do. Chipper 67 making a good point. He's certainly scored a few goals in half a season in Italian football. The fact, and because he scored quite a few goals for Verona in the second half of the season, as I say, 2 or 3 Serie A teams are looking at signing him, and kind of sort of mid-table teams likely mid-table teams in Serie A next season. One of the snags with Verona was they were kind of a relegation battling team when he joined them, and unfortunately he wasn't able to help them save their place in Serie A. So I'm certainly hoping Papa Leo in the game against Sporting Lisbon in a few days' time, that Celtic probably will go again with a mixture of first teamers and B team and academy players. Hopefully we get to see Camilo Duran for half an hour or so, maybe see Oxlade-Chamberlain for half an hour or so, maybe over the next few days we do get another player or two in. I think probably the plan would be when we get to play against Middlesbrough in the home friendly and then the AC Milan friendly, we'll be looking to get our first team squad starting the game and then giving the backups and the substitutes and stuff a go in the second half. But I think it was, for me, a bit of a disappointing game against Shelbourne. I think Celtic looked a bit slow mentally and physically, but they got there in the end. And it was quite nice for me to see players like Maeda and Mike Nawrocki maybe getting a second chance. So Gabby Boy saying Bowie isn't good enough. We're going up against a guy who only knows to build a team through aggressive tactics. Bowie is not the player. As I said, I thought it was interesting that Celtic have been reportedly looking at signing Bowie. He did pretty decently for Hibs against all the different opponents last sort of season and a half. As Chipper 67 was saying, he's done fine in half a season in Italian football. I think he's actually a pretty talented player. And for me, he coped fine playing for Hibs in the Scottish Premiership, so I don't really have any doubts that he'd cope playing for Celtic in the Scottish Premiership. But as I said, I don't see him coming to Celtic. I see him staying in Italy and moving back from Serie B with Verona after their relegation back into Serie A with one of the sort of mid-table teams. Chipper 67 putting forward Hoch and Francolino. I think the problem with them, I don't unfortunately see them coming to Celtic. I can see them going instead to another bigger, richer league, such as the English Premier League, Italy, France, Germany, etc. It'd be great to see those sorts of players come into Celtic, but I think unfortunately with we're probably having to look at less fashionable leagues and less fashionable teams, and trying to find the hidden gems coming from Japan and Eastern Europe and Scandinavia and stuff as well, rather than players who've actually made a really positive impression on European football with Europa League and Champions League and stuff last season. I think Camilo Duran had obviously a really good Champions League campaign last year for Karabag, 5 goals in the Champions League, scored against some really strong teams, Eintracht Frankfurt, Ajax, Newcastle, Benfica. So I think we actually have got a good player in Camilo Duran. So just as a wee reminder of the player that we're going to get. Camilo Duran, 24 years old, 5'10", Colombian, although he hasn't so far played international football. Can play centre forward, can play right winger, can play left winger. He's reportedly was valued at 1.7 million. The transfer fee is anything between 3 million up to maybe 5.5 million with various different add-ons. At Karabag, 45 games, 15 goals, 10 assists. But the key thing last season, 10 games in the Champions League, 5 goals and 1 assist. His season rating last season, 7.26 out of 10, which is really good. He's got good record for getting shots off, shots on target. Goal conversion rate was very good in the Champions League last season. One shot in every 4 was a goal. Didn't miss a lot of chances either. 4 missed chances, big chances missed in 30 games. It was a very impressive stat. Good passing accuracy, good dribbling if we do play him out wide, which is one of the possibilities, but not so good in the air. And he also has got the ability, a bit like Dyson Maeda, Hayun Yang, etc., to track back into midfield and win the ball back. So I think we've actually got a very versatile player. We can play him through the middle. He can beat people for pace. He can beat people by ball control. He can run at players, beat players, can play out wide, play through the middle. He also has the physicality to play as a bit more of a target man, holding the ball up and letting and getting people to come around him and feed off him and stuff. So I think we've actually got, yes, couldn't agree more, Michael Ross. We won't be getting Casper Holt. We won't get Frankie Lino. Unfortunately, players like that in the current climate will be going off to play for Brentford and Crystal Palace and Fulham and similar levels of clubs in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. I think the way to have got players like Hoch and Francolino and stuff to come and play for Celtic was probably try and buy them last season or the season before they actually started to really make their names, scoring goals in the Europa League and the Champions League and stuff. So, which is why I'm actually quite impressed at us getting Camilo Duran, assuming that he settles down into Scottish life and Scottish football well. Rubber Duck saying, it would be interesting to know your thoughts on our setup for this season. So I think Celtic have got a very, very good manager in Martin O'Neill. I think we've got some very good coaches. Sean Maloney, Fotheringham, McManus. I personally would have liked to see us get a brand new goalkeeping coach, simply because Stevie Woods has been a goalkeeping coach at Celtic for 18 years. And I do think that has its problems with someone who's been in the job for so long. I think a brand new goalkeeping coach probably would have helped Celtic move on a bit. I think Ross Grant, the set pieces and analytics coach that's come from Hearts, I think he's a very good signing as well. it'll be interesting to see how many of Celtic's players that are rumoured to be leaving end up staying. Doesn't seem to be in any real interest so far in Benjamin Nygren. Doesn't seem to be in any official proper bids so far for Engels, Maeda, etc. I'm certainly very hopeful and positive with Martin O'Neill talking about trying to play more attacking football. At times, Celtic's football last season was more sort of pragmatic, pretty sound defending, battling in midfield, and working together as a team and scoring goals late in the game. And certainly Celtic last season scored a lot of goals late in the game, half a dozen match-winning goals after 90 minutes, and quite a lot of goals being scored by players coming off the bench, primarily Kelechi Iheanacho, who scored something like 6 goals in the last 8 games coming off the bench. So I'm very positive about Celtic for next season. I'm very positive that we're going to win a double or a treble, and I'm very positive that Celtic's going to win through the Champions League qualifier in mid and late August, get into the Champions League, and I'm hoping for a similar sort of outcome as we had a couple of seasons ago when we got to the first knockout round. They got knocked out by Bayern Munich. Hopefully this year, if we do that, we maybe get a slightly kinder draw in that last 24, a bit what like Karabag did. Karabag, kind of like Celtic, qualified in the bottom region of the initial phase, got into the knockout phase, had a bit of a easier draw in that first knockout round to get into the next round to get knocked out by Chipper67 putting forward a quiz for a live stream. I think that might be an idea. We could certainly do that. Maybe, possibly, we could look to do that maybe in when we have our first international break, whenever that is, in a few months' time. That might be actually quite a good idea. So I think maybe I'll put that on the back burner and have a think about doing that in a live stream in one of the 2 weeks during the next international break. Could you give any reason as why we signed the Ox? Didn't feature during the split and looked miles off at Ibrox, hooked at half time. The reason I think that the reason that Oxlade-Chamberlain didn't quite hit the heights that we might have expected simply was the fact that he hadn't played football for 9 months between leaving Besiktas around about April, May. Then he had a few months to recover from injury. He then started training with Arsenal and Arsenal's academy team. So he hadn't played football properly for 8-9 months. He hadn't played any games other than inter-squad games with Arsenal in training. So I think, understandably, it took him a few months to get into match fitness. But I do think that Oxlade-Chamberlain can bring us experience. I think he can be a good positive influence in the dressing room, on the training pitch. I think he's a bit of a role model type of person as well. I think that's a useful thing. And I can't remember who put it forward, but they were suggesting that that Oxlade-Chamberlain might be a wee bit similar to Aaron Moy. Aaron Moy, again, had been playing in China, hadn't played football for about 6 months. He asked Ange Postecoglou, was it possible for him to come in to train with the Celtic squad, because he lives in Paisley and was looking for a nearby training place. And of course, Lanarkstown's nice and near to Paisley. And lo and behold, Postecoglou ended up signing him. And I thought Aaron Moy, in that one season he had for Celtic, was a very influential, important player. So I think possibly that's what they're looking for Oxlade-Chamberlain to be: an experienced backup, an experienced squad player coming off the bench, starting some games, maybe giving other midfielders a bit of a rest, maybe giving, hopefully, I think this season we need to give Callum McGregor more rests. He plays far too much football. Alison Timpany, the main thing about quizzes is the taking part. It's not necessarily getting the questions right. So, Slab and Cabbage putting forward an interesting theory. It's his personal thought that we'll retain Engels for one more season. And the fact that Engels doesn't seem to be going anywhere at the moment may well support that. Say there are said to be about 20 different clubs that are looking to buy Engels, but nobody, as far as we can see, has actually put in a bid officially that we know about, and certainly nobody seems to have gotten anywhere near Celtic's asking price, which people think maybe 25 million, maybe 30 million, and I wonder whether, as Slabber and Cabbage is suggesting, that Celtic have set a higher asking price than before, with the hope of trying to keep him for another season. I think things at Celtic are a lot more positive at this time of year, this time of this season, than they were at last season. I think there was an awful lot of stuff going on behind the scenes at Celtic, with uncertainty regarding several players, uncertainty regarding Brendan Rodgers. Was he staying in the longer term? Was last season going to be his last season? Rodgers last season hadn't been making any real commitment to stay at Celtic in the longer term. I think we now know that we've got O'Neill at least for one season, maybe 2 seasons. I think that also does give Celtic a strong ability to plan for this summer transfer window and the winter transfer window, and then depending how things are going in the winter transfer window, planning for another couple of transfer windows after that. So I do think in terms of the squad cohesion, squad spirit, I think there's a lot more happy players at Celtic now than there were 12 months ago. I think Rio Hatate is probably the only sort of disgruntled and unhappy player at Celtic. I think a lot of other players feel they've got a chance to become first-team squad players. I think players like Balakwisha, Novroki, Shinya Maeda all maybe think, if I have a really good pre-season, maybe I'll get to be part of the first-team squad and get some games in Europe, get some games in Scotland, win some medals, etc. So, also the fact that Arnie Engels played 45 minutes against Shelbourne also does suggest maybe that if he is up for sale, nothing much is happening at the moment. Slab and Cabbage, with a successful Champions League qualification and some good performances, Engels could double our largest transfer sale. Now, again, that's one possibility, is that maybe players like Maeda and Engels have been told, if we qualify for the Champions League, it may be those two have said, yeah, we'll stay at Celtic for one more season. If we get knocked out, heaven forbid, in the final qualifier mid-late August, maybe those two players could then get the green light to leave the club. There's a whole lot of possibilities. I think also if Celtic do qualify for the Champions League, it does also mean that we can add probably another couple of players in that last week of the transfer window, because players will be attracted to coming to the club because we'll be a Champions League team rather than a Europa League team. Yes, I think that's what I was trying to say, was that Oxlade-Chamberlain last played proper football in April, May of 2025. He then had three or 4 months not playing football at all due to injury. Then he came back training with Arsenal and with Arsenal's academy team. So again, so in essence, his fitness would have been pretty dodgy, having spent 3 or 4 months out injured after leaving Besiktas. So yes, so I think he's basically missed about 10 days of pre-season, signing a wee bit later than the other players came back. But I think he's going to have a good 4 weeks of pre-season training. He's going to be playing, I would guess, against Sporting Lisbon, Middlesbrough, AC Milan. I think Celtic probably will organise 1 or 2 bounce games and behind closed doors games as well, whilst they're in Portugal and back in Glasgow. In general terms, if I was going to do a quiz, what the questions generally would start nice and easy and maybe get a wee bit more difficult and a wee bit more difficult, and then there'd be probably a mixture of different sorts of questions, picture questions, questions about the past, questions about recent history, etc. So some people find them fun. Smell the glove. Engels will go in the last few days of the window, and this board won't have anyone lined up to replace him. As Slabber and Cabbage was suggesting, I think there's every possibility that players like Engels, Maeda, Nygren, etc. might well stay. And assuming we get through the Champions League qualifiers, then they'll stay for the duration of the season, potentially longer. My personal feeling is that, and again, this is just a feeling, it's not based on any evidence, because everything at Celtic is done behind closed doors, as it is with most football clubs. I think Maloney and O'Neill have been working very hard for the last 6 months in terms of player targeting, player scouting, player recruitment, working with the guy who used to be the head scout at Chelsea. Celtic already actually had a good number of scouts. I think just we had, for me, a major problem at the head of the scouting, head of recruitment on the football side with Paul Tidsdale. And I think there's a lot of disconnects between Slab and Cabbage. I agree that it probably for Arne Engels is 1 season too early. As you say, he's 22, 23. He had a couple of years of experience with Augsburg in Germany, come to Celtic. He's been a good player for Celtic. He's maybe not quite reached the heights one would have expected for teams like Notts Forest, etc., to be bidding 25 million for him in the January window. So I think he, like Nygren, could do with another season or two to make themselves even better players. Then when they do move to the English leagues or the Italian league or wherever they go, it'll be actually easier for them to move on. You could maybe point to the fact that one could maybe point to the fact that Matt O'Reilly hasn't really hit the heights since he moved to Brighton. Odsonne Edouard didn't really do that great moving down to Crystal Palace, and he's kind of moved from team to team. So there are maybe a few players who would really have benefited from another season or two playing for Celtic in Scotland and playing for Celtic rather, in European competitions. Oops. Gavi Boy saying the strength exercises are unreal. Fans think they are running around. Fans wouldn't believe what the training is like. Certainly, I was really quite interested to when Martin O'Neill said after the Shelbourne game that when they're in Portugal for the week, they will be doing double training sessions. So a training session in the morning, a training session in the afternoon. I would guess probably what they'll be doing is, because of the hot weather in Portugal, be doing a training session probably relatively early in the morning, maybe 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, then having 2 or 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours out the sun, maybe doing stuff, tactical stuff, watching videos, team talks, motivation talks, that kind of thing, and then back out for training 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon for another few hours. So, but certainly the video highlights of them training looked pretty intensive. shuttle training, flexibility training and stuff as well. So good point, Chipper 67. For starters, he can't get into the Belgian midfield ahead of Raskin. So yes, I think personally for Engels, but also for Celtic, he could do with another season in Celtic, playing for Celtic. Maybe make himself a regular in the Belgian squad. I would guess with Belgium, Belgium will be probably having a wee bit of a clear out of their squad. They've got quite an old squad who've been together for about 10, 12 years or so. So it's one of these ones where there will be quite a turnover of the Belgian squad. So it probably does give him a chance this season and next to really establish himself at international level. So really good point. So, Rubber Duck 67, now that Duran is here, what's the next priority position? I think it certainly sounds like O'Neill is definitely planning to use Camilo Duran primarily as a centre-forward striker. As I say, from his past games, he is almost equally skillful and adept at playing right wing and left wing. Very left-footed player. So a wee bit similar to Nicholas Kuhn, who did really well for Celtic up and down the right wing. So it does sound like we've got a player who maybe is a bit like Dyson Maeda, i.e. can play wide, can play through the middle. Player maybe has some of the skills that Nicholas Kuhn used so well for his super season at Celtic. Wee bit similar also to Paddy Roberts that we had for a couple of years on loan in Rodgers' first spell. So it does depend. I think probably Celtic will look to get one more experienced striker centre forward, whether that's Kelechi Iheanacho, as is being rumoured, whether it's maybe Kieran Bowie, whether it's another player yet to be named. There's another player that Celtic have been strongly linked with. So this is a player that Celtic reportedly have been intensely scouting over the last week or so. A player who had a really good World Cup, particularly in the game between Egypt and Argentina. So it's Haziem Hassan, players for Real Oviedo, was playing in the La Liga 1 last season, but they got relegated, which actually is thought to be opening him up to leaving the club. Plays as a right winger, but also can play left wing and attacking midfield. 5'9", 24 years old, 6 caps for his country. Valuation around about £3.5 million, but there is a release clause at £10 million. So if Celtic were to offer 10 million, Oviedo would be obligated to sell him. The other key thing I think with Haziem Hassan is, as I say, they got relegated from the first division to the second division in Spain. But his contract actually is up at the end of next year. So again, it's a player that Oviedo would either be looking to get him on a new contract, which is unlikely now that they've dropped to La Liga 2, or selling him on in this transfer window. His stats aren't terribly impressive. Last season for Oviedo, 38 games, no goals, 3 assists. His average rating was a very, very decent 6.83 out of 10 in La Liga 1. His Oviedo career, 82 games, 4 goals, 6 assists. So again, not terribly impressive. He has played in the past for Villarreal, Sporting Gijón, CD Mirandes, who are a lower level Spanish club, and Châteauroux in Ligue 1 in the top level in France. And again, over his whole career, played a lot of games, 255 games, 15 goals, 22 assists. So his stats aren't terribly impressive, but his performances for Egypt over this World Cup were very, very impressive. So I think there's little doubt that Hazem Hassan is leaving the club. There has been some speculation that he may be going to play in Turkey. A wee bit of speculation that he may instead move to play in the Saudi League. But reportedly, Celtic have put in a bid of something between 3.5 to 4 million. Smell the glove. You're fully entitled to your opinion. I think the problem is attracting players rather than Celtic not being willing to give players good contracts and so on. I do think Celtic have committed a lot of money to keep players like Hatate, Maeda, Carter Vickers, Johnston, etc., at the club. They've given them regular pay rises, which has kept them at the club. We gave Matt O'Reilly a pay rise, which kept him at the club for an extra season. So I think when a player wants to come and play for Celtic or wants to come and play in Scotland, which I think is difficult to do, I think the money is there to buy them and the money is there to reward those players handsomely to get them to come. One of the rumours regarding Benjamin Nygren was he had several different offers from around Europe, but Celtic were the ones who gave him the best contract, the best basic weekly wage and the best contract, etc. So I do think Celtic are rewarding their players who come in with good contracts, good financial security. And one of the rumours was that Nygren chose to come to Celtic partly because of the European football, but partly also because the contract offer he got at Celtic was better than it would have been for 3 or 4 other clubs who were in from when he moved out of Danish football. Chipper 67, 82 games, 4 goals, 6 assists, no thanks. If we base it solely on his stats, he apparently had a very, very good World Cup. I'm not sure whether anybody watched the Egypt against Argentina match. He is a very highly fancied player. He's made himself a very good reputation in French football and in Spanish football. His goal contributions, however, would be the first to admit are poor. But then players like Nicholas Kuhn didn't have terribly good goal contributions before he joined Celtic, and then he really took off in his second season for Celtic. So stats don't necessarily always tell the story. If we look at Callum McGregor's stats for last season, his assists were low, his goals were kind of dried up in the second half of the season. So Michael Ross asking, what are Balikwisha's chances of being Player of the Year this upcoming season? I would say next to zero. However, I did think he showed 1 or 2 nice touches in the game against Shelbourne, driving out of midfield. He's had a really nice pass to set up Callum Osmond in the box 2 or 3 times. Some nice passes, some nice crosses. His final shot, when he had a chance to shoot, wasn't very good. And another time when he had a chance to shoot, he hesitated and got blocked out. So, however, 2 or 3 years ago, when he was playing at his best for Royal Antwerp, he was one of the most promising young players in Belgian football. Had a couple of bad injuries after that, and he doesn't seem to have recaptured that magic. But maybe if somebody boosts his confidence, I think when he came in to join Celtic, it was at a really bad time, the end of a rather unhappy time under Brendan Rodgers. He came in right at the end of that transfer window. Obviously, Celtic had just been knocked out of the Champions League qualifiers. He and Chinecki came in at the last minute. He had a really terrible first game, Balikwisha, and I think his confidence went to pot. But I think there is a decent player inside Mikel Onge Balikwisha. The question is whether Maloney, Fotheringham, McManus, O'Neill, etc., can get that player out of Balikwisha, get him back to the way he was 2 or 3 years ago. Nice point from Michael Ross. Karl Mack is never a defensive midfielder. It's kind of how we've used him basically since Brendan Rodgers came back. 23, 24, he pushed McGregor further and further back. I think McGregor's best position is one level forward. And I would really love to see Celtic sign a proper defensive midfielder. Someone like Victor Wanyama, someone like maybe Nir Bitton, somebody who can step back into defence if required to have 5 men in defence, but good enough to step forward into midfield, pass, win the ball, get into the box to score goals, etc. So I do think Celtic need a real proper enforcer style defensive midfielder, and I would really hope that would be one of Celtic's main targets for this transfer window, is to get a real proper defensive midfielder and then transition McGregor further and further forward as the new player gets used to playing at Celtic and gets used to his teammates and so on. Gavi boy, you've got good hopes for Ure. I thought Ure looked really good in the second half. Hatton on the left wing, I thought he was really impressive in the second half. Wasn't terribly impressed with Turley, wasn't terribly impressed with McArdle. I thought Liam Kennedy also in the second half against Shelbourne looked really, really good. Apparently he's not really a player I'd ever heard of before, but just 17 years old. Obviously Hatton, a wee bit more experienced. Kyle Ure had a season away at Ayr, I think, last season. Was quite impressive playing in the Scottish Championship for them. I think he might be a player, Kyle Ure, that might be able to step forward and be part of the first team squad, a wee bit similar to what Colby Donovan did last season. Rubber Duck 67, Player of the Year, Ralston. Well, certainly the stories are that Celtic are talking to Anthony Ralston's agent with a view to extending Ralston's contract. Ralston's one of the players whose contract is up at the end of the season. So his contract expires in May, June of 2027. The only other player who's kind of first team squad whose contract runs out then is Adam Montgomery. I don't think Adam Montgomery's got a future at Celtic, so I wouldn't be too surprised if he, one way or another, ends up leaving the club either this summer or over the course of the year. I don't see him staying at Celtic. Gavi Boy saying Ure needs to be first team now. He had a bad injury at Ayr. My understanding was he certainly impressed Scott Brown and so on at Ayr. I think he's probably, and he's obviously played for Scotland under 17, under 19, under 21 level. So I think he is probably a player who's ready to step up. It'd be quite interesting to see whether he's one of the ones who gets games against, obviously played against Shelbourne, but gets a game again against Lisbon, maybe gets some game time against Middlesbrough, and then some more game time against AC Milan. Michael Ross, did McArdle have a good game? I didn't think McArdle had a good game. Some people, I can't remember which particular Celtic fan site was giving players gradings, but they had McArdle as one of Celtic's better players. I was actually quite disappointed with him, in that he is a player who's had a wee bit of first team experience. He just didn't really look like he had his A game going, and the B team and the academy have actually had a bit more match practice than the first team squad have. They've played a few proper warm-up games already. Casper, it'd be great to sign Casper Hoch, but I think unfortunately there are many clubs ahead of us in the pecking order for signing Casper Hoch. I think he's destined for a bigger, richer league in Europe, having had such an impressive end to his Champions League with Bodo Glimt. Scored some big goals against big teams, bit like where are we? Sorry. Chipper 67, I think the answer to that question is Duran seen as a striker or a winger? I think the idea is that Duran is going to, a bit like Dyson Maeda, primarily play through the middle, but there is the option of playing him out wide. I think he's of a type where you could play him as a second striker, attacking midfielder. You can play him out wide as well. So I do think he's a very versatile player. Apparently for Karabag, he spent about 1/3 of his time playing out wide on the right wing, some swapping over to the left wing, and then 2/3 of the time played through the middle. And certainly that's where he got in the Champions League. He primarily played through the middle. He played a wee bit more out in the wings in the Azerbaijani league, in the league matches, but in Europe he primarily played through the middle. So I think Chipper 67, to answer your question, yes, I think he's going to be a striker, and I think he's also going to play at times out wide on the right, potentially out wide in the left, but probably out wide on the right. Yeah, because we do seem very keen these days to have players playing on the right who are left-footed and players who are on the left who are right-footed. It'd be great if actually players were two-footed, and then you wouldn't know whether they were going to go inside or outside the fullback. So, Champions 7. So, in terms of Duran, it sounded like from what Martin O'Neill was saying that he's going to be playing Duran primarily as a striker, but that might also depend a wee bit on whether we get anybody else in. Also, probably depends a wee bit on whether Callum Osmond improves, whether Shinya Maeda can re-establish himself at Celtic. Shinya Maeda obviously had a very disappointing start to his Celtic career, had a disappointing start to his loan spell in German football, but he scored something like 3 or 4 goals in his last 3 or 4 games in German football before his loan spell finished. And he had one very, very good season in Japanese football before he came to Celtic. So he is a player who can score. Well, in Japanese football, he scored like 20 plus in his second last season in Japan. So he clearly is a player, once he gets his confidence and gets settled into the country and into the team, he could turn into a surprisingly good player. So maybe whether Celtic go for another first choice striker depends a bit on how well Yamada and Osmond and stuff develop, whether Iheanacho comes in or not. I would like to see Celtic sign another first choice striker. Then it gives us a lot of flexibility up front for playing two strikers, one main striker with a player playing off him. It does give us the option of playing Duran out wide on the right, and if we are lucky enough to keep Dyson Maeda out on the left, but swapping in players from time to time as well. So I do think the benefit of Duran is he gives us lots of different options. Smell the glove. Well, I think the whole world would love. The whole world would love to have players like Yamal and Haaland and Mbappe in the team. Wouldn't have given Norway much of a chance to beating England at the weekend in the quarterfinal, was it not for the fact that pretty much at the moment, if you get the ball into Haaland in the box, he scores one time out of every 2. And he does seem to be a player who maybe doesn't contribute terribly much to the rest of the team, but a bit like Jimmy Greaves in the olden days, get the ball to Jimmy Greaves in the box and he would score goals for you. So Dexter saying that you've got a big mate who's a groundsman and normally tells you whispers, but nothing from him so far. Celtic do seem to be keeping a lot of their transfer dealings secret. Either that or they're not actually making any transfer dealings, depending on who you believe. Certainly, the more stories I read from the Daily Record and the Sun and various other different newspapers, the less and less faith I have in them actually being able to tell a true story. 90% of stuff that those supposed journalists create just seems to be unsubstantiated rumours and gossip and their own opinions masquerading as something an insider source at Celtic has said to them. Chipper 7 saying, why don't I open a can of Tennent's and get into the mood? Well, for a variety of reasons, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are not alcohol days, just Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. So today is a Thursday, so it's a non-alcohol day. So tomorrow, if I did the live streams on Friday, I would be quite happily having a beer or a glass of wine or whatever. But because the live streams are on Thursday at the moment, where it's an alcohol-free zone from me. Also, it does allow me to actually remain fairly compos mentis and fairly sensible for the whole 3 hours of the live stream. Chipper 67. It's an interesting theory that every day is a beer day. For me, for a variety of reasons, to do with my heart condition I've got and blood pressure and so on. The advice is it's to have 4 days of no alcohol and 3 days of light alcohol use. Anyway. Chipper 67 saying what Celtic's priorities: a left back, a right back, a backup, a right back as a backup, and a goalkeeper. I think certainly I think Celtic needs someone better than Ross Doohan as the number 2 goalkeeper behind Viljami Sinisalo. I think Sinisalo did enough at the tail end of last season to justify being Celtic's number 1 goalkeeper, but I do think we need to have someone as good as Viljami Sinisalo as the backup, simply for the fact that, as happened to Kasper Schmeichel last season, he got himself injured, never really got himself fully fit all season. So I do think we do need to have a goalkeeper as good or nearly as good as Sinisalo to back him up. So I do think a goalkeeper is a definite priority. I think Ross Doohan's a perfectly good third choice goalkeeper. He is Scottish, he is Celtic trained, so that does help with the UEFA quotants and quotas for the Europa League, Champions League, European competition quotas and stuff. So I think he's a perfectly good third choice goalkeeper, but I think we do need a proper good backup to Sinisalo. And we need someone who's good enough to challenge Sinisalo for the first team, first choice plays. And much the same, I think we do need to have someone really reliable and good to play as the backup left back to Kieran Tierney. And I think Kieran Tierney will probably next season be a bit more endurance, a bit more energy. I think he'll play, if he keeps injury free, even better this season than he did last season. For me, he was one of Celtic's best players last season. But I do think we need to have someone the level of Sirachi or better to back him up, because it doesn't look like we've got any young up and coming left backs good enough to back up Kieran Tierney. So I think we do need to get someone, either a young promising left back from elsewhere in Britain or from Europe, or a more experienced player like Sirachi, or maybe get Greg Taylor to come back from Greek football or something like that. Alison Timpany, in your head, you're semi-retired. Well, officially, I'm semi-retired as well. I haven't worked for 2 or 3 years. 2 years. Although I wouldn't be against going back to working part-time, but in essence, I'm officially semi-retired, but it's probably actually retired as such. Kieran Allen, good point. We need to sign more height and speed throughout the squad. I think certainly Celtic do need, for me, a bit more height in defence. One of as good a defender as Cameron Carter-Vickers is, he's only about 6 foot tall. So I do think having a bit more height in defence would be very, very useful. Both Trusty and Scales are around about 6'3". Dane Murray's 6'4". So there is a bit more height with them. I can't remember how tall Nawrocki is, but he's taller than Carter-Vickers. The slight snag is Alsa Johnston is 5'10". Kieran Tierney's about 5'10". So I do agree that I think we need a bit more height in defence. Potentially a big, tall, sort of hybrid right back, right centre back to bring on late in games if we do need to sort of close down a game to hold on to win. Also, with Carter-Vickers, there's always the worry that he might get himself injured now. At least if we did keep Mike Nawrocki in the squad and he keeps himself fit, he could quite happily play as a right centre back, and then we've got Trusty and Scales to be left centre backs. I would quite like to see Celtic sign a Virgil van Dijk style signing, i.e. a talented young player with some experience in a top league who's maybe in his early 20s. So a bit like Virgil van Dijk, a bit like Jason Denayer, who we got from Man City on loan. Because I think one thing that O'Neill's got to keep in mind is the fact that that Carter-Vickers is a bit injury prone, Alsa Johnston's a bit injury prone, Kieran Tierney's a bit injury prone. So I do think we need to have good, strong backups at right centre back, right back, and left back. So, and I do think we need to have an experienced, good quality backup for Sinisalo to keep him challenged to maintain his first taste. So Eddie C, what you've seen of Duran, he's not an out-and-out striker. Well, certainly for Karabag in Europe, he played as an out-and-out striker, scored 5 goals in 10 Champions League games, which is a really very, very decent output for a player playing for Karabag, one of the least fashionable teams that got into the Champions League last season. They did remarkably well to get out the group phase into the knockout phase. They took some big scalps on the way. He has got the capacity to play out wide, as I said, but he has got, a bit like Dyson Maeda, he has got the ability to play through the middle, and I think that's probably his strongest position. But which position he plays for Celtic might depend on who we keep and who we bring in over the last 6 weeks of this transfer window. Yes, Chipper 67. So it is a shame that Yang will be missing for a few weeks because of Asian Youth Games, which is sort of an Olympics qualifier type of thing. So he will be missing the Rangers match for definite, if assuming that he doesn't get excused from that squad. But it's one of these under-23 type competitions, and with him being a full member of the full South Korean squad, obviously he would be one of the more experienced players to be in their Olympic under-23 squad. Sorry to hear you've broken your heel and you're off for 6 weeks, possibly 12 weeks. It's sounding a wee bit like, unfortunately, how things are with Jota, our wide player. A lot of rumours that Jota's had further complications, but other stories are suggesting that he's still on course for coming back to play around about October, November time, with hopefully getting into the first team squad by the start of 2027. So it doesn't appear actually that Jota's got himself re-injured or worsened his injury or had any complications. It just, his progress has been much slower than predicted. Some very, very interesting non-football related comments in the comment section. Don't know whether anybody actually saw. I haven't, to be thoroughly honest. I didn't really watch hardly any of Egypt's games in the World Cup. Reportedly, say this player Hassan was very, very impressive. His stats certainly aren't very impressive, but I don't know whether anybody actually saw him playing, particularly in the World Cup for Egypt. He's a French player of Egyptian parentage, has played for some good teams in 2 very big European leagues. So my favourite ice, I'm not particularly a fan of ice lollies, but it's really, I do like vanilla ice cream, raspberry ripple, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, we don't actually have any in the house. Otherwise, I would be having some now, because it's actually super hot where I live at the moment. Yep, getting back to football type things and away from ice creams and ice lollies and stuff. Eddie C asking, is it true that Everton are favourites for Maeda's signature? Suddenly the two teams who seem to be at the top of the list for Daizen Maeda appear to be Everton and Brentford. Obviously, moving to Everton, moving to Brentford, for me would be, in terms of Daizen Maeda's career, would be taking a step or two down in terms of size of club, etc. Obviously, moving to Brentford, especially. However, he would be playing most of his football in the English Premier League, which obviously is an incredibly strong league. If he went to Everton, he wouldn't be playing any form of European football. I do wonder, certainly none of the teams in for Daizen Maeda are teams who will be playing in Europe next season, of the ones that are rumoured to be in for him. But again, as far as I'm aware, nobody has actually put in a proper bid for Daizen Maeda. Whether that's simply they're waiting for him to come off his post World Cup holidays back home in Japan, and maybe waiting for him to come back to Glasgow before any negotiations start properly. As I said, there were some stories that Daizen Maeda was talking about staying at Celtic a bit longer, that Martin O'Neill had kind of persuaded him to stay at Celtic for another season. There's some confusion as to whether Maeda's contract is up next summer or the summer after. Obviously, if his contract was up next summer, Celtic would probably have to be looking to sell him this summer, simply to cash in on the money side of things for him. But there are some stories that actually he's got a contract for 2 years, not just one more year. Whether the stories about Maeda being keen to stay or not, I don't know. Nice point from Smell the Glove, that Everton and David Moyes might well be a good place for him to go to. I think Everton Obviously, quite a big club, big brand new stadium. However, not got the best players, and they won't be playing in Europe. And my suspicion is Everton next season will be mid-table or just below. I don't think there'll be relegation fodder for next season, but I don't certainly see them challenging for the top 6, the top 8. I think they're a kind of team in the region of 10 to 14 in the Premier League. But and I think Maeda is also a very, very talented player. I think his style suits Celtic's style very well. Whether that will translate to fitting into the Everton team and David Moyes' tactics, I'm not so certain. So fingers crossed that Maeda stays and doesn't go. Yep. So, the question is whether Grealish will get another chance at or whether he'll be sold on or loaned out, etc. Yes, really good point, Pat McLaughlin. If Elliot Anderson's worth 116 million, Maeda's worth 400 million. I think it really does show that the transfer market in England and many big European leagues is really, really stupid. Lots and lots and lots of players who nobody's particularly heard of. Suddenly they're being sold for 20, 30, 40, 50 million. If you think about Fabio Silva, who had a pretty awful half a loan season at Rangers. He had been bought for about £50 million to join Wolves. He never really established himself at Wolves, got loaned out here, there and everywhere. Not quite sure actually where Fabio Silva now is, but he, a couple of years before he played for Rangers on loan, was bought for £50 million. So I think some of the transfer fees these days are absolutely ridiculous. And what I've seen of Elliot Anderson in live games and in highlight games, he doesn't really strike me as being that quality of player, anywhere near that quality of player. But for one reason or another, Man City have paid over £100 million for him. Yes, so Fabio Silva at one point was rumoured to be coming to Celtic. However, thankfully he went to Rangers and was pretty awful playing for Rangers, which was good for Celtic. And I think Celtic dodged a bullet by not getting Fabio Silva in on loan for the second half of that season, because apparently his wage demands were pretty gigantic. Rangers spent £3-4 million to have Fabio Silva on loan for half a season, a mixture of his loan fee, but also paying the great majority, if not all, of his weekly wages as well. I haven't heard of Fabio Silva for a long time, but he could well be at Dortmund. He's a player that a lot of people think is good. From what I saw of him, I was far from impressed with him. I think one of the difficulties we've got at the moment at Celtic is there's an awful lot of rumours and very, very few confirmed stories. I think there are a number of players who are being closely followed. I think there are a number of players that Celtic are negotiating for. I think there are a large number of players that Maloney and O'Neill have earmarked and targeted and got scouting reports on. think it was interesting that Camilo Duran, rather than being announced as a Celtic player, has gone off to pre-season training in Portugal. Interesting theory that might be relating to work permits, and that his visa and work permit for playing for Celtic hasn't quite come through. That actually would make an awful lot of sense. I think obviously whether he plays in the midweek friendly against Sporting Lisbon is probably not terribly important. With Qarabağ being involved in the Europa League qualifiers, which I think are actually tonight, he actually will have already had a good pre-season with Qarabağ in Azerbaijan. So he actually probably is at least at the same stage as the other Celtic players in terms of fitness, possibly even a week or two ahead of them, given the fact that Qarabağ had a Europa League game this evening. So I don't think there's any particular problems in terms of Camilo Duran getting match fit. I think it's more just a question of him fitting in with his teammates, learning the formations, learning the tactics, learning how the various different players out wide and behind him pass and cross and so on, and also interactions with players like in the longer term Yang and Forrest and Chinecki and Nygren and Engels and McGregor and so on and so on. Nice comment from Green for Gold. Duran looking hungry like a wolf at training today. He certainly looked fit and fresh and like he was fitting in. With him being Colombian, he may well also have a good level of English. Although Colombia is a native-speaking Spanish country, they actually, because they are bordering between South America and Central America, there are actually a large number of Colombians have actually got good levels of English. So he may be, if he has got a good level of English, he may well fit into the Celtic squad better than players like Yang and Maeda and Furuhashi and Yamada and stuff, who were all had very, very limited English when they came to join Celtic. Green for Go suggesting that Duran's temperament is a bit notorious. Well, reportedly, I have seen one story to say that when he was a younger player, a young player in Colombian football, he was quite a bit of a hot-headed, bad-tempered player. He actually got loaned out to Flamengo in the Brazilian league, and then took part in a sort of major academy training type thing, and became much more responsible, much more level-headed. I think his reputation in his one season in Portuguese football and his one season for Qarabağ, he's actually more mature, more settled, more calmer than he was when he was a teenage player. Slaban Kabish, very good. Qarabağ 1-3-0. I was actually a wee bit surprised to see that they were in the Europa League qualifiers rather than the Champions League qualifiers, because a wee bit similar to Celtic, Qarabağ had won the title something like 9 times out the last 10 years, up until last season when they ended up coming second. So I was actually a wee bit surprised to see that they'd dropped from first place to second place last season. So some comments regarding that every summer it's the same in terms of rumours and stories and gossip and supposed insider information being released by various different websites and newspapers and sports channels and stuff. I think it's pretty much the same no matter which football club you support. There's lots and lots of rumours of players that might be joining Liverpool, might be joining Chelsea, might be joining Rangers or Aberdeen or Dundee United. I think it's pretty much the same at every club all round Britain, all round Europe. I don't think Celtic are actually an awful lot more secretive than any other club. Most clubs keep transfer deals and stuff behind the scenes. I think most football clubs around the world, there's a lot of rumours and speculation and gossip. I think with Celtic being a big name and a high-profile club in Scotland, I think there's a bit more gossip and rumour and intrigue. And I think there's also, for me, reading stories in various different newspapers and websites, I think there's also quite a bit of false information and information put out to hurt Celtic, and sort of negative stories about Celtic as well. And certainly when you read stories in the Sun, or when I read stories in the Sun or Daily Record online, a lot of them seem incredibly negative, and quite often BBC, Talk Sport, Sky Sport, there's often a degree of negativity as well in some of them. Yes, so Pat McLaughlin, my understanding was as a teenager, so 17, 18, 19, he was quite hot-headed, not very mature. Apparently he settled down. He obviously moved from Colombian football to Brazilian football back to Colombia, then to Portugal, from Portugal to Azerbaijan now to Scotland. So he does appear to be a player who can move from one country to another, fit in with a brand new team. He had a pretty decent record at Portimonense in Portugal, pretty decent record for Karabag, and did seem at both those two clubs to be able to settle down quite quickly into a brand new team. So hopefully settles down quickly. And I don't think there are any other Spanish-speaking players at Celtic at the moment, which is why it might be useful if we did get Sirachi or Arojo back, because they're both Spanish speakers. I guess Kieran Tierney, having been over in Spain on loan for a season, he might well have basic levels of Spanish. Maybe Kelechi Iheanacho as well. Oops. Yes, so Gavi Boy is saying, the thing is, as much as the fans are panicking, Martin has a plan. He's the only part of the club that I have faith in. I have a lot of faith in Martin O'Neill. I do think with him being a more of an old-fashioned manager, I think he maybe does actually have a lot more interest and control over transfers and contracts and recruitment and stuff, a lot more than Brendan Rodgers was reported to do. So I do think I think we are lucky to have Martin O'Neill. I think we are lucky to have Sean Maloney. I think Sean Maloney is a very, very good assistant manager. I think he's a very good judge of player talent. I think Fothering's a good coach. I think all three of them are very good motivators, and players are all very positive about Stephen McManus as well as a coach and as a motivator. And also, as I say, I've heard a lot of very, very positive things about this. The new coach who's replaced Gavin Strachan, the guy called Ross Grant, who came from Dundee United to Hearts, and then Hearts has come to Celtic. He certainly made a big difference with Hearts' ability to attack at corner kicks and free kicks and long throws, and also improve their defence of all those things as well. And I think Celtic have been haven't really defended corners particularly well in the last couple of seasons. Don't think we also scored enough goals from set pieces. And I really would like Celtic to sign somebody who can take direct free kicks from the edge of the box, etc. Benjamin Nygren does show quite a bit of talent for it. Engels probably should be also good at it as well. But I really would like to see someone like a Lee Griffiths or a Shunsuke Nakamura who can very, very consistently put the direct free kicks into the net. I think from memory, the only time we scored from a direct free kick straight into the goal was the Nygren goal against Hearts. I don't think we scored any other direct goals from direct free kicks. We had a few direct free kicks that went to the box that got scored with headers or second balls, etc. But and I don't think we also use corner kicks quite as well as we should do, both on attack and defence. So very, very hopeful that Ross Grant's going to improve that a lot. Dexter saying, who would I take from the Scottish League? Elliot Watt, Eliza Just from Motherwell, Chaiwa from Hibs, Mark Leonard, who was on loan from Birmingham to Hearts. I would guess that Leonard's way back down to Birmingham. My understanding was it was just a straight loan from Birmingham to Hearts. There wasn't any kind of purchase at the end. So I think he's back down with Birmingham. I thought he was pretty decent. Chaiwa was pretty decent as well. I think Elijah Just is one player definitely from other Scottish teams that I would take. I was more impressed with Elijah Just than Taquindi Masmonizi. I think Masmonizi started very, very well for Motherwell, but faded away in the second half of the season. I think Just was a good player for Motherwell whole season. Elliot Watt, interesting player. Could well step up to be a Celtic player. I think Celtic do need, for a variety of reasons, a couple of Scottish players to be a part of our midfield or part of our defence. Yeah, so as I said in the past, there have been quite a lot of rumours that Celtic have been negotiating and talking about Chaiwa from Hibs. There seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between what Hibs seem to be wanting for him, which seems to be about twice as much as all the various different transfer experts think he's worth. Elijah Just, there does seem to be a lot more positivity regarding Celtic getting Elijah Just to come from Motherwell to Celtic. I'd read a few stories suggesting that both Masmonizi and Just were looking to play in England or play in mainland Europe rather than staying in Scotland. But as I say, I have seen 2 or 3 quite positive stories that Celtic and Motherwell and Just agent are having negotiations. But again, who knows? One player also maybe who's currently who was playing in Scottish football last season, I would actually be quite keen for Celtic to sign, although I'd be surprised if he actually moved from his current club to Celtic, would be Claudio Braga of Hearts. I think he was one of the best players in the Scottish Premiership last season. There are several European teams and English teams looking to sign him, but I do think that would be a good signing for Celtic. I think he would fit in really well into Celtic's team structure. I think he would fit into the way we play. I think he would be a player who would score goals for us. Obviously, he, like Justin Masmonizi's, had a season playing in Scotland, so used to the weather conditions, used to muddy pitches, used to the plastic pitches for the few places that still has plastic pitches, used to the very intensive New Year's and Christmas schedules. So I do think actually signing. Do think Celtic signing players who are currently playing in Scotland is a good idea, in that they're already acclimatised, they're already settled into the country, and they all already are aware of who their opponents and stuff are. Interesting point from Celtic fan 67. Celtic should be looking beyond the SPFL for talent. Well, I accept the point up to an extent, but as I was trying to say earlier on, I do think players who are already playing in Scotland, particularly if they're a player who's moved from abroad to come and play in Scotland, and if they've played in Scotland for a season or two, and they've been, and after all, in the team of the season, people like Elliot Watt, Masvenizi, Just, Claudio Braga, Kizaridis, the Hearts goalkeeper, were all players who got put into the best 11 in last year's Scottish Premiership. So all those players really showed that they were able to play good quality Scottish football. So I do think there is a good reason to buy players from other Scottish clubs. I do think it's also a good idea to buy young Scottish players, but also Scottish players maybe in their 20s for the sake of UEFA coefficients, having to have four homegrown players and 4 Scottish trained players. Now, obviously, the player has to be good enough to play for Celtic. And I do think several of those players fit the bill. And obviously, if all your players that you're signing are coming from European clubs, Japan, the Far East, America, etc., you're going to have quite a decimated squad for the Champions League, assuming that we qualify in a month's time in that 2-legged tie, because you do have to have 8 players that are Scottish trained or homegrown players, i.e. they've been in the Celtic training academy, etc., for enough years to qualify to meet the criteria. So, and very soon, a lot of the players that Celtic have been relying on to be one of those 4 plus 4s are going to be on their way out. I think this is going to be James Forrest last season. I don't think we'll have Callum McGregor for much more than a couple more seasons. Anthony Ralston, Tierney, they're both getting into their late 20s. So I do think it's a good idea for Celtic to be bringing through their own players, whether that's players like Ewer, Hatton, McArdle, etc. I say I was really impressed with Liam Kennedy, who had just moved up into the B team, age 17. I thought he was really good. Pat McLaughlin, Ajax have left Dahlberg out of their pre-season training camp. Yep. I think the question would be whether Dahlberg has changed his mind about playing. He was very, very keen to move out of Belgian football. Appeared he wasn't terribly keen to come and play in Scotland. And then when Ajax came in from very, very late in that transfer window, he kind of jumped at the chance. I don't think he had a particularly good season for Ajax last season, although I didn't actually follow him in any great detail. But certainly all the stories are that Dahlberg's looking to move on, and Ajax are looking to move him on as well. So, so if Dahlberg was a possibility, I think he would be a very good player for Celtic, potentially. He was successful first time around for Ajax, was successful for Anderlecht, has had international experience, European competition experience. So I think he would be a good player for Celtic. And I think he would fit in really well with Celtic's framework. And obviously, with the fact that he was on Celtic's radar and scouting system last summer, would imply that already the club will have quite a lot of video clips and scouting reports and analysis and so on of him. So but I think Dahlberg again probably will be looking to move on. It's the Pona boy saying Dahlberg's not for me. Yep. As I said, he had a very, very impressive record in Belgian football before he went to Holland to play for Ajax for the second time. Didn't go very well from the second time around. Oh dear. Oh dear. Yep, Pat McLaughlin. So with regards to Dahlberg, yep, that was my understanding, was that that it didn't start well for him at Ajax, and he kind of got frozen out, and he's looking to move on, and they're looking to move him on. So I think he's the kind of player who might consider coming to Celtic if he was guaranteed Champions League football. So he may be someone a bit like last summer, who comes onto Celtic's radar late in the picture. I think, well, it's not qualifying for the Champions League last season, that put off Kasper Dolberg. So Kasper Dolberg had kind of resigned himself to be staying at Anderlecht for a further 6 months and then moving on in the January window. But as I say, Ajax came in from very late. So it didn't sound like there was ever any real strong chance he was going to come to Celtic last summer anyway. Eddie C saying Dahlberg's better than what we have up front, that's for sure. I think certainly, I think personally that Callum Osmond, if Callum Osmond keeps on improving the way that he has at the end point of his career at Fulham, I thought he looked very, very promising in the few games that he got before and after his terrible hamstring injury. I think he's got lots and lots of pace. I think he's a very intelligent, bright player, makes very good runs. It was him that set up the goal for Maeda to put us 2-1 up with 3 minutes to go against Hearts. He did score a super goal in the League Cup semi-final against Rangers when Martin O'Neill gave him a chance, because he got frozen out by Brendan Rodgers for the first 3 months of the season. I think Osmond could be, in a couple of years' time, a really good Celtic striker. But I think he needs a year or two learning off other players and getting more and more experience. So yes, I would. In terms of what we have at the club, Dahlberg would be a good striker for Celtic. I'm hoping that Camilo Duran turns out to be as good as Kasper Dahlberg has been for the most part of Dahlberg's career. I think Duran, if he settles, could be a really good player for Celtic for the next few years. I think obviously he's 24 years old. He's played in a few different countries. He's probably coming towards the best years of his career. So fingers crossed that he really works out. He turns into a player like Kyogo, who scores a lot of goals for us, or Georgios Giacomakis scores lots of goals for us in a short period of time. Sorry to see you going slabbering cabbage. There's no need to send me any money. Everything I do is for free, and just for the fun of it and the socializing and so on. Kieran Allen thinking Osmond's got good speed, looks good enough player, but we might need more experience to lead the line. I completely agree. I think Callum Osmond, if we can keep him nice and fit, is going to be an ideal player to be one of two strikers on the bench for Celtic. I don't think he's good enough or experienced enough to be Celtic's number one striker. Much the same as when Johnny Kenny got thrown in at the deep end under Brendan Rodgers and under Martin O'Neill. He also, for me, wasn't experienced enough or good enough to lead the line for Celtic at his age. He admittedly did have a really good time playing in the English First Division on loan for Bolton, scored a good number of goals for them. Unfortunately, he picked up an injury and so he won't be back fit for probably another month or two. Thank you very much, Slab and Cabbage. If you do decide to give me a wee contribution, that is entirely, it'd be really, 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 really welcome. And pretty much all the money that I make, which is not terribly much from the channel, goes into things like new microphones, new cameras, and at the moment I'm saving up for a new camera because I got a new and I got a new microphone for last Christmas from Santa Claus. So if you do want to give me a wee drop of money, that's entirely fine, and it will be very, very, very gratefully received. But everything I do is for free. But wee gifts would be lovely, but it's not required in any way. Michael Ross saying, why can't Osman burst onto the scene like other younger players do other clubs? I think is one of the difficulties, unfortunately, with modern day top level football, is that managers don't tend to take such a big risk when it's a Celtic player, a Rangers player, a Chelsea player, etc. I think if you want to be a young player breaking into top level football, you maybe have to be playing for a less prestigious club, which is kind of maybe how I don't think Lennon Miller, as good as he was, would have got the chance he got at Motherwell had he been a Celtic player coming through Celtic's academy. But I do think you're entirely right. I think sometimes if you throw young players in at the deep end, they really do turn out to be brilliant players. Kieran Tierney maybe being the best example of that. Got thrown into the first team about 10 years ago as a 17, 18-year-old by Brendan Rodgers, I think it was. He really turned into a very, very, very good player. Obviously, in the old days, people like Paul McStay, Kenny Dalglish, Danny McGrain, etc., were making their Celtic debuts at 17, 18. Charlie Nicholas, 17, 18, making his Celtic debut. So I do think that that sometimes throwing young players into the first team can really work. Just I think, unfortunately, with the pressure on modern day managers, with clubs who can't really afford to lose, such as Celtic, and giving young players a chance, risking a young player getting a chance as a starter, I think the player has to be exceptionally good. And I don't think Callum Osman is exceptionally good. I don't think he is that good just yet. But I do think he will get better and better. But I think he does need a couple of years learning his trade. He's only, 19 years old now, 19, 20 years old now. So he's still a very young man. Pat McLaughlin saying, I've never seen Iheanacho fit in his whole career. Certainly in his whole time at Celtic, he's been at best half fit. If Celtic are happy that Iheanacho comes on for the last 20, 30 minutes of a game, which to be fair, actually worked really well in the last half a dozen games of the season, the last 10 games of the season. He scored a lot of goals for Celtic at the tail end of the season. Some very important goals. Obviously, the goal against Hibs that won that match, the game against Motherwell that won that match, the 2 goals in the semi-final that won the helped Celtic win the semi-final, the goal in the cup final that sealed the victory against Dunfermline. So he scored a lot of good goals for us in the last couple of months of the season. I don't think he is a player whose fitness would allow him to be a starter in the team, but certainly last season he was very effective coming off the bench. So maybe if Celtic are happy for that to be what he gives us, and if Iheanacho was happy, that's what his role is going to be at Celtic, the kind of super sub type player. I wouldn't be against Iheanacho staying at Celtic for another year or two. I suspect that Iheanacho's career ambitions are to be a first choice starter at somewhere else, rather than coming back to Celtic to be a bench player, super sub. It's possible that Paulo Bernardo, being Portuguese, might speak some Spanish. You never know. Let's say Kieran Tierney might do, because he did spend a season. I think Anton Rogan's left foot, regarding fitness against the low block, I do get your point that you maybe aren't doing quite so much running about. But some of the way that Brendan Rodgers liked to play, the way that O'Neill last season certainly liked to play, and did quite often in his first 5 years as Celtic's manager, he does quite like the central striker dropping off, coming to midfield, spinning in behind, etc. So I do think that the way that O'Neill would want the team set up does require the main striker to have a lot of energy and a lot of endurance, and that certainly wasn't the way that Kelechi Iheanacho was when he came back from his second injury last season. Good point, Kieran Allen. If we sign a few younger players, they will need time, and that's going to be difficult to manage unless we get in quality. And that, to me, is a fast, strong, wide player, or players, fast players, tall centre back. I do agree. I think those are all good areas that we could improve on. I do think with any football team, there has to be a degree of forward planning. So whether that's buying in some young players to develop over a couple of seasons, backing up star players like McGregor, Carter-Vickers, Johnston, Tierney, etc. So not coming in necessarily to be first choice starters, but coming in for them to learn their trade, and in a year or two's time replace Engels, replace McGregor, replace Johnston, replace Carter-Vickers, etc. So I think there's quite a bit of merit in that, and ideally, if those players were Scottish, that would be even better. But I do agree there does need to be a balancing act. The other thing would be that we could look to bring through the Ewers and the McCardles and the Turleys and the Hattons and so on, bring them through from the academy and the B team. We've not had the best of success in doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. Colby Donovan's probably about the only real Academy B player who's established himself as a first-team squad player. The others, like Rocco Vata, Kelly, and Gannon Doak, kind of briefly were in the first-team squad and then disappeared off to play down in England because they weren't convinced that they would get a proper career at Celtic. I do think of all those players, not maximising and capitalising on Ben Gannon Doak was a mistake that was made. Transition of Ange Postecoglou into the Brendan Rodgers times. So, Michael Ross, you'd think Sirachi would have a few offers, though. Very, very strange stories with Marcello Sirachi. In that some stories are saying that Celtic are very actively pursuing Marcello Sirachi. I then read a story on one of the Celtic fan sites claiming that they'd phoned and spoken to Marcello Sirachi's agent, who completely rubbished the story that Celtic were doing anything to get Sirachi to come to the club. I'd be surprised if a Celtic fan site has the access to Sirachi's agent to get an interview that nobody else does. However, maybe the story's true. To come back to your point, Michael Ross, my understanding is Sirachi does have a few offers from other South American teams, a couple of teams back in Uruguay, a couple of teams in Brazil, reportedly a few offers from teams in Spain and teams in America. Whether any of that's true, goodness only knows. So Eddie C saying Osman will have to be good enough. Probably he's all we'll have. I can see him Duran out wide. I think from what I've gathered from what O'Neill has said so far, the first plan is to announce the first plan is to use Duran centrally, and possibly depending on whether we get more reinforcements out wide, whether we get more reinforcements to play as central strikers, then there is the option to move them out wide and use them as a backup striker or an option coming off the bench from time to time. So Duran has not officially been announced. He is part of Celtic's training squad across in Portugal at the moment. So the indications are that he has signed for Celtic. Alison Timpany was suggesting that maybe the reason that it hasn't been fully confirmed is the fact that they're still waiting for visas and work permits, as was the case with Wilfred Nancy. It took a good couple of weeks for all the work permits and visas and stuff to come through, and that's why with Wilfred Nancy there was a wee bit of a delay of a couple of weeks between when he was appointed until when he was announced, and then so maybe that's why there's been a bit of a delay with announcing Duran's signature. But otherwise, I can't see why Camilo Duran would be across in Portugal at the moment if he wasn't a fully fledged Celtic player. Just as I say, it may be they haven't got the international clearance, they haven't got the work permits, etc., to allow him to actually play a first team game or friendly for Celtic. So Belfast Irish Celt 32, seeing Martin O'Neill in sunglasses and a baseball cap today, he reminded me of Dale from The King of the Hill. He certainly did look a wee bit odd with his baseball hat and his sunglasses and his shorts on. Also quite surprised to see 2 or 3 of the coaching staff wearing tracksuits and tracksuit trousers, because I would guess it would be pretty warm across in Portugal at the moment, even if they were training early morning and late afternoon. But it did look a wee bit on the odd side. But I'm more than happy to put up with Martin looking a wee bit odd in his shorts and t-shirt and sunglasses and baseball hat, if he manages Celtic as the way that he did last season, but also does get some sort of good preparation and forward planning into Celtic's recruitment staff, scouting staff, bringing academy players into the first team squad, or getting academy players getting off to have really good loan deals for good quality teams. So I do think Celtic do need to an extent to develop their own talent from inside, as well as trying to bang in good talent from Scotland, from Britain, from Europe, and from overseas. Yes, he does have a passing similarity to the dad with the glasses in American Pie as well. So, Eddie C, do I think that Dermot Desmond will open the biscuit tin? It's been closed for a while. Well, it's a matter of opinion. Whether it's been closed for a while, we did spend 5 million plus on Sarat. 5 million plus on Balaquisha, 5 million plus on Chinecki last summer. We spent massive big wages to bring Kieran Tierney back to the club. Admittedly, that was on a free transfer. We gave big deals to people like Johnston, Carter Vickers, McGregor, Maeda, Hatate, etc. over the seasons. A couple of seasons ago, we spent 11 million on Engels, 9 on Ida, 6 on Trusty, 4 on Bernardo. We spent 8 million on Jota. So Celtic have been spending money. Now, admittedly, quite a lot of the money that Celtic is spending is balancing off against on transfer fees coming into the club, selling on O'Reilly, selling on Tierney and Jota from a few years ago. So to answer the question, Eddie C, I do think, as I've said a few times, I do think the money is going to be there if O'Neill can get players that he wants to come to the club, who are good enough to come to the club and good enough to be actual difference makers. I think the money will be there to pay the transfer fees, but also pay them maybe a wee bit more in terms of wages and contracts and bonuses and so on. Because I think that is also one of the things that Celtic can do, which reportedly was the turning point for getting Nygren to come to Celtic rather than the 3 or 4 other offers he had last summer. Yeah. Yep, Pat McLaughlin. I think, as I said, maybe about half an hour ago, I do think Celtic do need a backup goalkeeper to back up Sinisalo. I think Sinisalo deserves to be the #1 goalkeeper for the season upcoming. But I think he needs, just like Kasper Schmeichel had for a couple of seasons, I think you need to have someone as good as him or almost as good as him to back him up. For one thing, goalkeepers do get injured. Goalkeepers can get suspended. And I do think we need to have someone as good as Sinisalo to come in and replace him if and when Sinisalo loses form, or if and when Sinisalo loses, gets injured or suspended, etc. I don't think Ross Doohan is good enough to be that #2 at Celtic. Whether whether there's any truth or not in it, again, we'll find out over the next week or so. Reportedly, Celtic have been trying to sign this player called Sjark Ernst from Hertha Berlin, 23-year-old, 6'3", 2 under 21 caps for Germany. Valuation said to be 3.4 million pounds. Several stories saying that Celtic have offered 4.3 million pounds for him. Interestingly, a wee bit similar to Hassiem Hassan, the winger playing for Real Oviedo. Ernst's contract runs out next June, so I guess the Hertha Berlin will be looking to sell him on as soon as they can over the next 6 weeks or so. Pretty decent record last season for Hertha Berlin. 7.27 out of 10 rating, almost a 69% save percentage. Been at Hertha Berlin for now into his 4th season at Hertha Berlin. Played elsewhere in Germany at various different levels. So again, looks a very, very promising goalkeeper. Much the same level of probably ability as Sinisalo, much the same level of age as Sinisalo, same kind of height. Admittedly, Sjark Ernst doesn't have full international experience like Sinisalo had before he came to Celtic, and still is doing now. So interesting one. I think from what I've heard, he's a really good goalkeeper, a very good up-and-coming goalkeeper, and I think coming to play for Celtic might well be something that he would consider in terms of battling with Sinisalo for the #1 spot, and then obviously a chance for European games as well, which is never going to be his ability in German football at the moment. Dexter saying, "I'm hoping we get Keira Almaty again and give them a good bumping." I would. My personal feeling is that had Martin O'Neill been the manager this time last year, that Celtic would have taken Keira Almaty a lot more seriously. I think they would have scouted the Keira Almaty a lot better. They would have prepared tactically a lot better of how to combat the way that Keira Almaty play. I think they would have exploited weaknesses in the Keira Almaty team. I don't think Brendan Rodgers and his coaching team and his scouting team did enough due diligence preparing the team for the Keira Almaty game. I think there was a feeling amongst Rodgers, his coaching staff, the backroom people, and the squad that all they had to do was turn up and they would beat Keira Almaty. Keira Almaty, very, very together as a team, all played towards the same goal, played for each other. And they were a lot more fired up for the game than Celtic were, particularly in the second leg. Yeah, San Fran Celtic, we were lucky to get to penalties against Keira Almaty. They did have one or two chances. We had one or two chances. If Dyson Maeda's scoring boots were on like they were at the end of the season, at the start of the season, he had a brilliant chance with a few minutes to go against Keira Almaty in Glasgow. With about 10 minutes to go crossing Kazakhstan, he had another one-on-one with the goalkeeper that he managed to miss. I think Benjamin Nygren forced a very good save out the Keira Almaty goalkeeper in extra time, but Keira Almaty did a very, very good job of closing the game down and trying to hit Celtic on the break. And it was almost as if Keira Almaty were playing for extra time, playing for penalty kicks right from minute one. And of course, they'd won the previous round on penalty kicks as well. So. Yep, San Fran Celtic Dyson's 1-1 is a lottery. Yep. Sometimes Dyson Maeda is actually best when he's got no time really to think. It's more just there's the ball, shoot, score, or quickly react to the ball in space and then nip in and beat the defender or nip in and beat the goalkeeper like he did against Rangers and against Hearts and so on. And oops. So Wyoming CSE, would the squad the way it is now get us to the Champions League? I think this might be a controversial opinion. I do think with Martin O'Neill at the helm and people like Maloney, Fotheringham, McManus in the background, I think also if the Celtic team all pull together and play for each other, I do think, as was the case at the end of last season, from the last international break through to the last game of the season, where Celtic went unbeaten, and they won all their games. They won 100% win record from that point to the end of the season. I do think when Celtic all get on the same page, they all play for each other, etc. I do think Celtic actually are a strong team, and I do think also having a good together team and a good together management structure does actually maximise the talent of the players. I think there are holes and deficiencies in the squad, but I do think Celtic, if they play to their best, they have got the players to come through. Part of it is going to depend, for me, to answer that question, on whether players like Nygren, Johnston, Maeda, Engels stay at the club. And if they don't stay at the club, we really need to very quickly get in players as good as them or as nearly as good as them to replace them, because I don't think we've got the squad depth to replace star players like Johnston, Nygren, Maeda, Engels. I don't think the Paolo Bernardos, I don't think McCowan, etc., are good enough to step into Engels' shoes. I think Hatate is definitely on his way out. Otherwise, he is a player who's got the ability to take to replace Engels. Now, looking at the players that Celtic's got, we have got, if Nygren was to leave the club, we have got people who could step into that attacking midfield role. Yep, Eddie C. Balikwisha, we blew £5 million on him. It may be that Martin O'Neill can do some magic with Balikwisha. As I say, he was 2 or 3 years ago one of the most talented players in young players in Belgian football. He's had a couple of very poor seasons, obviously a terrible start to his Celtic career. I think he also had 1 or 2 wee injury and fitness problems over the course of the Wilfred Nancy spell. So I do think Celtic's got players in the squad. I do think that as O'Neill proved last season, if you manage people properly and give them confidence, they are good players. And after all, we did send 8 players to the World Cup. The World Cup. Admittedly, all those players are coming back home after their holidays in a couple of weeks' time after the World Cup. But we were good enough to have 8 players who were good enough to play in the World Cup, and generally about half of our squad are internationals or under 21 internationals. So we have actually got a lot, I think, quality in the squad, but 100% agree we do need to have more quality in the squad. And what we particularly need, I think, is better quality in our backup players, so that if we do get someone injured, like last season when we were without Carter Vickers for most of the season, without Johnston for most of the season, without a first choice proper striker for most of the season, we do have players who can step in off subs bench and be as good as the starters. And I think that's one area that Celtic are deficient. Whether players like Callum Osman can step up, whether Hyun Yang can take another 2 or 3 steps forward in his career, whether Colby Donovan can take another 2 or 3 steps forward to be near as good as Alistair Johnston, I don't know. Whether players like Trusty, Scales, Navroki, Dane Murray can all improve a bit in case Carter Vickers does get injured again. Really good point, Kieran Allen. Brian Clough was a tactician, not a coach. I think the gigantic bulk of the training and so on done at Nottingham Forest was done by Peter Taylor, Clough's assistant. What Brian Clough was brilliant at was man management, motivation, and good tactics, assessing opposition very well, working out ways that his players could beat the opposition, and particularly the early years of Brian Clough at Nottingham Forest. Some of the players that he had at Nottingham Forest early on were players who were kind of reject from other clubs, players who were sort of journeyman professionals, and he got all those players playing 10, 20, 25% better than they ever had before. So I think there is a tremendous amount of benefit having a good, clever, experienced coach, and we've definitely got that with Dexter saying David Blaine couldn't do anything with Balikwisha. Well, all I can say is if we watch the game highlights from Balikwisha 3-4 years ago when he was at his best for Royal Antwerp, he was definitely a very good player. He was challenging people like Raskin and Engels and so on for places in the Belgian international squad. He'd been a regular player for Belgium at under 21 level, so he was a good player when he was younger. Got himself injured, and he's never quite been the same again. San Fran Celtic, would you take Kyogo back? Don't shoot me. Well, the answer to that question is I think Kyogo's had such a terrible, terrible time since he left Celtic. Miserable half a season at Rennes in France. Miserable time for Birmingham in the English Championship. He struggled to get any games for Rennes. He struggled to get any games or goals for Birmingham. I think, unfortunately, Kyogo is he's on the downswing of his career. I think probably had Kyogo stayed at Celtic for another season or two, I think his form and performance and stuff would have kept at a good level. I think, however, his confidence is shot completely, which for a goal scorer striker is massively important. Obviously, some of Kyogo's skills were based on his speed of movement, his speed to get into gaps, his very clever way of dummying defenders to get himself into space. And generally, as you get that wee bit older, those skills start to go downwards. Yep, Ernest, mostly Kyogo knows now that the grass isn't greener. Yes. No, I think Kyogo thought that by moving from Celtic to play in Ligue 1 in France he was going to be moving to a more prestigious, higher quality league, and on paper that's very much the case. I think Kyogo thought that if he played especially well for Rennes, scored lots of goals for Rennes, then he would have got into the Japanese World Cup squad. But obviously that really unfortunately backfired for Kyogo. A wee bit similar actually, I suppose, to Jota, who left Celtic to go and play in the Saudi League, struggled to get game time playing in Saudi Arabia. Then he had a pretty unsuccessful brief spell at Rennes, and then we bought him for £8 million about 18 months ago. Unfortunately, got himself injured within a few months of coming back to us. Because I do think Jota would have been a really good player for us last season had he not been injured at the end of the season before. Anton Rogan's life, you're looking at hard machine like the Huns next year. I'm not convinced. I know Derek McInnes has a reputation for that sort of football. I'm not sure the players that Rangers have at the moment can play the Derek McInnes style of football, or would want to change the way that they play football to fit in with the Derek McInnes. I think it's easier for Derek McInnes to get players who are journeyman Scottish players or journeyman players coming from England, or players like Kazidis, Braga, etc., who've come from smaller leagues and smaller teams in Europe. I think it's easier to get them to play to a different style and stuff. I think Rangers have got quite a lot of players who are too big for their boots, too self-important to change the way they're going to play to fit in with Derek McInnes' style. I think that was also part of the fact of why Russell Martin struggled at Rangers last season was he tried to change the way that Rangers played, and a lot of the players refused to change the way they play. He refused to fit in with his tactics. People like Diamande, Raskin, being good examples of players who didn't really seem to try very hard when Russell Martin was the coach, but seemed to play better when it was Danny Rowe. So I'm not massively convinced that Derek McInnes has got the players at Rangers at the moment to fit the style that he likes to play, and I'm not convinced that the players that Rangers have got at the moment would adapt to fit his system. But we'll find out in in a few months' time, with how well that Rangers start the season, how well that Celtic start the season, we'll find out whether Hearts are able to recapture the success of last season. I think with them having lost their manager and lost their captain and lost a couple of their better players, and strong rumours that Cammy Devlin, who was one of their key players last season, he's going to be on his way out. He looks like he's very keen to move over to America to play in the Major League Soccer over there. But we'll see how all that develops over the next 6 weeks or so. So, San Fran Celtic predicting Callum Osmond for 20 goals this season. If Callum Osmond scored 10, 15 goals this season coming, I'd be very, very happy. Partly that implies that we've got a couple of good strikers ahead of him in the pecking order. Whether Callum Osmond's got the ability to be to get the kind of contributions that Adam Maeda did a couple of seasons ago, I think he's got the talent. The question would then be whether he's got the mentality and the kind of the emotional maturity to take 2 or 3 steps forward. I think he's got a lot of the skills you need as a striker: fast thinking, fast moving, intelligent, makes good runs, good strong finisher as well, can make good runs into the box to score, can make runs from deeper to score as well, can get balls over the top. So I think we could actually have a lot of good play from Callum Osmond next season. I see him more as a player coming off the bench, a bit like Adam Maeda did a couple of years ago, rather than being Celtic's number one striker. I don't think he's quite ready. I think he's got a couple of years before he's ready to be our first choice striker, assuming that he keeps on improving. Anton Rogan saying, hope they get relegated. Tony Bloom. Well, I suspect that next season, that for me probably this season coming, Celtic will win, Rangers will come second, and Hearts will be in a battle with probably Hibs for third and fourth place. I don't see Motherwell carrying on last season's success. I think Jens Bertel Askew made a massive difference at Motherwell. Again, he brought in a lot of players who were free transfers and turned them into a very, very good team. Eddie C, we're about to lose half of our squad. Well, as things stand, the only players we've lost from the squad have been Hatate Unimura, Lewis Palmer, and Stephen Welsh. None of whom, Welsh played 2 games for Celtic last season. Unimura 1 game. Don't think Lewis Palmer played any competitive games for Celtic last season. So we've not actually lost anybody so far from the squad. As things stand, nobody's made a proper bid for Maeda or Nygren or Johnston or Engels, etc. Lots and lots of stories, but nobody seems to have come in for him at all. So I dare say once all those players are back at Celtic and things start to settle down, we'll see whether Nygren, Maeda, etc., are staying or going. I was expecting by now that Arnie Engels would have left the club. The fact that he took half a game against Shelbourne on Tuesday does suggest that maybe the bids so far for him haven't properly started coming in, but we'll find out. Oops. So, San Fran Celtic, 4 months ago, we'd have all been happy to lose all our squad. Yep. I think for me, the squad that Brendan Rodgers had and the squad that Wilfred Nancy had, although the players were pretty much the same as O'Neill had, were much, much poorer. The squad the team that O'Neill turned those bunch of players into to finish the season going 100% win record I thought was quite remarkable, which actually does suggest they have got quite a lot of talent in that talent pool in that squad. But as I say, I do think Celtic were quite lucky to get Alison Johnston back at the right time. We got Arnie Engels back at the right time. We got Kelechi Iheanacho 75% fit at the right time. And we also got Engels, Johnston, Iheanacho. And we also got Dyson Maeda back firing on all cylinders as well. How much of that was down to O'Neill in terms of getting players like Maeda to start playing really well again? Who knows? But I think we were quite lucky in that we got 3 of our star players all back, fit to play the last couple of months of the season. Pat McLaughlin making a really good point. Do we have a starting 11 for the season? I don't think we quite have our starting 11 for the Dundee match just yet. Admittedly, at the moment, we've got our 8 World Cup players are still away. I don't see Yang leaving. I don't see Chunekis leaving. I don't see Ralston leaving. I don't see Tierney leaving. I'd be surprised if Nygren goes this year. I think Maeda's a definite likely player to leave this summer, and so is Engels. But I think the rest of them will be staying at Celtic. Don't see Trusty leaving the club either. I think he's going to be, particularly because Liam Scales is banned for the first 2 league games of the season. I think that actually might give Trusty, assuming he stays fit to that point, I think that might actually give Trusty a chance to establish himself as Cameron Carter-Vickers' first choice partner. Belfast Irish Celt 32. I'd love Elijah Just in our midfield big time. Yes, I think he would be. I think of all the players that were playing last year in the Scottish Premiership, he would be one player that I would have wanted Celtic to sign. Would be Elijah Just. I would put him I would put him ahead of Maz Monizi. I'd put him ahead of Elliot Watt. I'd put him ahead of the goalkeeper. I think he was Motherwell's best player. And Chaiwa from Hibs, Mulligan from Hibs. I think they both would be very, very decent players to bring into Celtic's squad. Claudio Braga would be a player I would love to see Celtic sign. Scored a lot of goals for Hearts. Played very well as one or 2 up front strikers. I think Braga would have the ability to play as a main striker or playing off the main striker as well. So I do think he would be a good signing, but it doesn't look like Celtic are after him. Elijah Just, there are stories percolating and building up that Celtic are looking to try and get him into the club. The suggestion was that O'Neill fancied Maz Monizi more than Elijah Just. For me, I would have it the other way around. Yep. Very odd to get a Lord of the Rings reference in the Celtic live stream, but if we expand the analogy of calling Ibrox Mordor, well, yep. Yep, tone. Oops. C7U would love to see the Egyptian boy running down the wing. As I said, he did apparently really, really well for Egypt. I didn't watch any of Egypt's games live. He reportedly had a great game against Argentina a couple of days ago for Egypt in the game they lost 3-2. As I say, he is very highly respected. He's played for some big teams in big leagues. His stats aren't terribly good. As I say, there is a reported £10 million release clause. However, his valuation is dropping and dropping because his contract runs out in 12 months' time. So some stories suggesting that Celtic have put in a bid of 3.5 to 4 million for him. There doesn't appear to be anybody as yet else who've put in a bid for Hatate Hassan. A lot of people aren't very keen on Hatate Hassan simply because his stats aren't very impressive, and his stats are not very impressive at all. Doesn't create an awful lot of goals, doesn't score a lot of goals. Does have really good stats for passing, pretty good stats for crossing, but would appear possibly from that his final ball in creating actual strong chances for teammates or putting the ball in the back of the net is something that he needs to improve on. But if somebody is one of the star players against Argentina at the World Cup, it does suggest that he is actually a good player. Belfast Irish Celtic. I don't think Braga would come to us. Fans did get him mad when he was getting back on the bus game in last season. I think there's probably some truth in that. I think the way football players these days are, they're quite sort of mercenary. They kind of go to the highest bidder, the person who'll give them the best contract, or go to the best quality of league that they can get to. I think he's probably more likely destined to go to play in Spain, Germany, France, maybe play in England, etc. I don't see him coming to Celtic, more so because he had such a good reputation playing for Hearts last season. I think he's probably attracted interest from the bigger leagues than the Scottish League. And I do think if Celtic came in with a good offer for him, and there weren't offers from similar size clubs elsewhere, I don't think he would have a problem coming to Celtic. But who knows? Well, the thing certainly is that he's got a release clause of 10 million, but the transfer experts value him as a 3.5 million pound player. So in essence, Celtic have given him, have offered what he is actually valued. And in general terms, if you go in to buy a car or go in to buy an iPhone or whatever, you don't tend to say, okay, the car's worth £10,000, but I'll give you £15,000. You pay what the car's worth, or you pay for whatever. You don't say, oh, right, a pint of beer is £5, but I'll give you £7 for it. You pay what the things are actually worth. And reportedly, a lot of Spanish clubs put in massive release clauses into people's contracts simply to try and protect their investment. So anyway, who knows? The valuation for Hatate Hassan is 3.5 million. That's what various transfer experts have valued him at. The fact that his club had a £10 million, well, actually, they had a £16 million release clause last season because they were in La Liga 1, but because they've been relegated to La Liga 2, that clause drops to 10 million. But reportedly, all Spanish clubs always put massive, big transfer release clauses into everybody's contracts, simply to protect their investments. Not that they think that player necessarily is worth that at the moment. They're kind of betting the player will get better and better and be worth £10 million in a few seasons. I think because Hatate Hassan's stats haven't really backed up his talent, that's probably why his actual value has stayed at the £3-4 million worth. Anyway, if we think to last season, we got Nygren for somewhere between 1.5 and £2 million. He certainly, given his goals and assists and performances last season, was worth way more than £1.5 million. We got Hatate for somewhere between £1 and £2 million. We got Maeda for somewhere between £1 and £2 million. They obviously were worth massively more than that. So you pay for whatever, you pay the asking price, and we don't quite know what Oviedo's asking price is. And because Hassan's contract runs out in 11 months' time, his value is likely to go down and down and down, because obviously by the time it comes to the winter window, he'll be able to negotiate freedom of contract. Gavi boy, so Belfast Irish Celt. I think Ure was one of the players that, a couple of days ago, that looked good enough to maybe take a step up the way that Donovan did the season before. I think you're given the fact he had a good season with Ayr last season, although it was curtailed by injury. I think he could be the one who's had enough experience playing first team football to step up to be a Celtic first team squad next season. I think a few of the other ones like Turley, McCardle, Kennedy, Hatton are probably just a bit too young to take that step up. They probably need to get sent off on loan to Partick Thistle, Dunfermline, Wraith Rovers, Ayr, Ross County, whomever, Livingston, who got relegated. Pat McLaughlin saying Rodgers coming back with Herbie number 53. I certainly hope. I hope that Brendan Rodgers never comes back to Celtic as a manager. I think he was very successful in terms of trophies in his two spells put together, but I think he actually was quite a disruptive influence on the squad first time around, and a very disruptive influence on the squad second time around. I think doesn't tend to stay at any club very long. Got sacked by Liverpool in his fourth season, sacked by Leicester in his fourth season, left Celtic first time around, 2/3 of the way through his third season, left Celtic second time around, 1/3 of the way through his third season. So he doesn't tend to stay at any club for very long. And I think one of his difficulties is he's not very good at refreshing a squad and keeping the squad getting better and better. Which was very much the case at Leicester, very much the case at Liverpool as well. In that he had success at both Liverpool and Leicester, but he didn't build on that success to keep on getting the club to move forward. In his third and fourth seasons at both Leicester and at Liverpool, the club went backwards, and he wasn't able to keep things improving. Yep, Gavi boy, Ure needs to be involved now, getting playing. He's the one I can see being our future, despite the unhappy family. I do think he, of all the young players against Shelbourne, he was the one that looked like he might be ready to make that step up. I think, as I said earlier on, Hatton looked good, Kennedy looked good, but I think they probably both need a season or two out on loan to Scottish Championship clubs or lower half Scottish Premiership teams to move them forward to being good enough for Celtic. Yep, Slabbering Cabbage. Just is like something taking over your old deed Grand's house. Dressed like her, smells like her, talks like her, sings her songs. It's not her. Norman Bates FC. It's a very interesting take on. Yes, I think I didn't get the full context of the interview, but Chris Boyd was kind of talking about that the fact when he went back to Rangers the second time, it just didn't feel like the club he used to play for, and the whole kind of ethos amongst Rangers has changed. I don't think Rangers will be a particularly strong challenger to Celtic next season. I think with them spending £40 million last season and getting absolutely no success, I think they're probably going to have to sell players to buy players. I think they've already spent some of this year's transfer budget in the winter window of earlier this season, and a lot of those players that they brought in the winter window just didn't move on. A couple of their best players last season, especially Mikey Moore, came in on loan. Mikey Moore is not coming back to Rangers, as far as it would seem. Looks like he's probably going off to play in Germany, either on loan or possibly even permanently. Alison Timpany used to see Lennox out and about, not so much now. Don't know if it's his health. It's that great. I think that's sadly the case with all the Lisbon lines that are still alive. I think Bobby Lennox, up until a year or two, was actually quite fit and active. I think he's struggling now that he's getting that bit older. I think that's very much the case with Jim Craig as well. Last year or so, he's really been starting to fail physically and mentally. It's rather sad, obviously, with next May time being our 60 years anniversary of winning the European Cup, as it was at that point, across in Lisbon with the Lisbon Lions. I think there's only three of the Lisbon Lions still alive. And I think they all are, unfortunately, as would be expected with how old they are. I think they're all starting to fail physically and mentally. Yes, as I was saying, Pat McLaughlin, there is a £10 million release clause on Hassien Hassan. I don't think anybody, even including Real Oviedo, thinks that Hassan is worth £10 million now. As I say, they put that release clause into his contract a couple of years ago when they signed him from Villarreal, with the expectation that he would get better and better, and that way they were maximising their investment in him. I don't think anybody thinks that he's worth 10 million, but we'll never know. Maybe we will. Thanks for being on the live stream, Alison Timpany. We're planning to do another live stream 9 o'clock next Thursday. By that time, we'll have maybe seen Camilo Duran playing for Celtic in the friendly against Lisbon. Maybe it's a bit too soon, especially if your theory of the visa and the work permits and stuff is actually true. I dare say all those little administrative type things and permits and laws and stuff will all get sorted out in the next few days, if they haven't already been. Gavi Boy saying if he's got a 10 million release clause, can't see it getting triggered anytime soon. Certainly, in terms of his, as I said before a few times, his stats are not impressive at all. But his performances in the World Cup have been impressive. So whether these particularly good games for Egypt in the World Cup are a wee bit of an exception to the rule. Let's say his season rating at Oviedo last season was 6.8 out of 10, which is a pretty good for a whole 38 game season. That's actually a pretty good average score of 6.8 out of 10, which implies he's getting at least 6 out of 10 in every game. Some games 7 out of 10, some games 8 out of 10, etc. So But if we go simply on his stats, he doesn't look like a player that Celtic want, although Celtic have signed players with less impressive stats who have actually turned out to be much better players. Say Kuhn's from memory, Kuhn's stats weren't terribly impressive before he came to us from Rapid Vienna. He had a wee bit of a slow start, but in his second season for Celtic, he was one of Celtic's star players in that second season under Rodgers. And I think we really missed Nicholas Kuhn out on the right-hand side all last season. And not that his career has actually gone anywhere since he got sold to Como. He's had a very, very, very disappointing time in Serie A last season with Como. There were quite a lot of stories that he was going to be moving on, but that doesn't seem to have happened so far. Wyoming CSC, are the Kieran Bowie links genuine? The answer to that question is goodness only knows. There are a few people who claim to be transfer experts. The guy Anthony Joseph, who works with Sky Sports, he says that several different teams, including Celtic, are inquiring with Hellas Verona, Bowie's team in Italy, as to whether Bowie's available and at what price he's available. My understanding is there are already 2 or 3 Serie A teams looking to buy Kieran Bowie, and I think given the fact that Bowie's already over in Italy, he's more likely to go to them rather than coming to Celtic. And there were some stories suggesting that Bowie wasn't keen to come to Celtic last January, which is why he ended up going across to Italy, because he wanted to try his luck in Europe rather than trying his luck at another Scottish team. Whether that's true or not, goodness only knows, because all we can really do is oops. To be thoroughly honest, Pat McLaughlin, I don't actually know quite what the wage budget of top South African and top Egyptian teams are. I would guess not terribly good. The difference with Hassiem Hassan was that he actually is a French person of Egyptian parentage. He's never actually ever gone anywhere near Egypt in terms of playing football, other than for the international team. So he spent his whole career either playing for French teams or playing for Spanish teams. However, given the fact that a lot of the African teams have actually been doing very well in the World Cup, that's admittedly most of them have all been knocked out already, but a lot of them got through from the group stage into the knockout stage. A couple of them, like Morocco, got into the deeper stages. I think there is a lot of quality in African football, and I don't think the transfer fees or the basic wages, etc., are high at all in African football. Yep, very good point, Gavi boy. Everyone has their ideas as to who should sign. But it's a different situation having to bring in a player and work the system. I think that's also has to be a factor, is how well that player fits into the squad, both in terms as a footballer, but also potentially as in terms of their personality and their language skills and their adaptability and versatility and stuff as well. So I do think all these things are important. I think also the psychological side of things is quite important as to how well a player will settle down in a foreign country, a new culture, new language, new training schemes, new teammates, etc. It does look with Camilo Duran that he has got the ability to move from one country to another country and to fit in with his new teammates and new tactics very quickly, in that he's done that over the last 3 seasons, moving on from one team to another, then on again and on again. Sadly, Michael Ross, if we're talking about Kylian Mbappe, I think any links to Kylian Mbappe are completely and utterly nonsense that you've made up yourself. Belfast Iris, I bet Nicholson is trying to BBM clubs on his BlackBerry for players. I don't actually think at these initial stages Nicholson is the least bit involved in any kind of player recruitment, player scouting, player targeting. My understanding is that Maloney and O'Neill are in charge of that, in liaison with the scouting team and in liaison with the ex-head scout at Chelsea. I don't think Nicholson, etc., comes into it until the player actually comes in, and it's then down to signing contracts and working out wages and contracts and salaries and bonuses and stuff. I don't think he actually has much of a hand, if any, in the initial stages of recruiting, scouting, bringing players in. I think once the player's been identified and negotiations have already started with agents and players and clubs, then he comes in to finalise the legal side of things, the financial side of things, the contract side of things. But that certainly is what several of the supposed clever insiders are suggesting, is that O'Neill and Maloney have got a very strong hand in terms of overseeing the transfer scouting and targeting, etc. And they're the ones who are assessing the players once the scouting reports and all the footage and stuff comes back. I think obviously we're quite lucky with this guy Ross Grant, who's come from Hearts, because one of his extra skills is as a player analyst. I think also Mark Fotheringham, given the fact that he's coached all over England and all over Europe, that he also is a good judge of talent as well. So I think actually Celtic actually do have a good set of coaches and analysts to run the rule over players. And I do think, from what several people have suggested, O'Neill is kind of the figurehead and the overseer for that. Paul Boy 67 suggesting Haaland. Well, Erling Haaland has always been kind of 9 levels too good to play for Celtic. Michael Ross suggesting that Haaland would be a useful squad player. I think after this World Cup, with the way that he's playing, he's probably going to be one of the most sought after players in the world. Big, tall, fast, scores goals with his head, scores goals with his left foot, strong enough to hold the ball up, can get goals out of nothing. I can easily see Erling Haaland moving away from Man City in the next season or two, and maybe trying his luck for a club like Paris Saint-Germain or Real Madrid or Barcelona or something like that. Sam van Celtic, that Wilson Glad, who played on the right wing, Touristus Res last season on loan from some club in England. I think there's a lot of quality. I think there's a lot of quality in players all over the place. I think there are some hidden hidden gems in lots of different leagues, smaller clubs, etc. Part of it, I think, is taking the risk and giving a player like that a go. After all, a lot of the players that many Celtic fans have talked about Celtic signing, Masminisi, Just, Watt, Callum Ward, Longello, the fullback, Sparrow, the other fullback at Motherwell, or the players that Hearts had, people like Kazarides and Braga. All of them were players who either came in on free transfers, like Masminisi did and several others, or came in like Braga and Just for very, very low transfer fees. I think Motherwell spent something like £300,000 on basically a brand new squad last summer and turned it in with a mixture of existing players, a couple of loan players, plus a whole heap of free transfers and very low fee players. They turned it into a team that was one of the best in Scotland last season, came fourth in Scotland last season, good enough to beat Celtic, good enough to beat Rangers, good enough to draw with Hearts, good enough to beat Rangers a couple of times. So I think there is a lot of quality, and there's quality in less fashionable leagues and less fashionable clubs. It's a question of finding that talent, and clearly Hearts did a good job of that last season. Motherwell did a good job of that last season as well. Whether Celtic would have welcomed a player like Takindi Masminisi coming in from Leicester City on a free transfer, or Elijah Just or Claudio Braga coming for £100,000 from smaller clubs elsewhere in Europe, I don't know whether Celtic fans would have been terribly impressed had those been Celtic signings last season. Certainly this season, if we were to sign any of those players, it would be signing them for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 million pounds, when last season, when there were unfashionable players at unfashionable clubs or rejects from Leicester in the case of Masminisi, we could have got them for nothing or next to nothing. Paul Boy, sorry lads, funny feeling England going to win the World Cup, just a feeling. Certainly they've apart from the Croatia game, they haven't actually played terribly well against Ghana, haven't played terribly well against Panama, didn't play particularly well for about 80 minutes against Congo, did start well against Mexico, did have a really strong spell against Mexico, then they went down to 10 men and then they really, really struggled. Michael Ross, yes, I did say Just. I'm trying not to say Elijah Just because it would appear his name might well be Elijah Just. I'm sorry, it's just a little idiosyncrasy. Nice. When I forget, I mispronounce his name. Gordon Flowers, good day to you as well. Great to have you on all the way from Australia. Completely the other end of the day from us. We're approaching, well, it'll be midnight in 1 minute's time here in Scotland. I'm sorry, Slabbering Cabbage. I'm sorry, Michael Ross. Every now and again, I unfortunately mispronounce Elijah Just's name as Just. He's an interesting person. He's got qualifications to play for about 3 or 4 different countries, but chose to play for New Zealand, which is where he and his family ended up settling. Very funny, Michael Ross. All I would suggest, Michael Ross, is you maybe try talking non-stop for 3 hours, trying to be vaguely entertaining and vaguely talking some common sense. Now and again, mentally, you slip, you lose your concentration. You're too busy reading other comments and stuff, and now and again, I make mistakes. I'm very sorry for being a human being and making mistakes. Yeah, so England winning the World Cup. After all, England won the World Cup in 1960, so that's 60 years ago. Interesting parallels, obviously, with Celtic winning the European Cup in 1967. So next year rather, will be the 60-year anniversary of that. This summer is the 60-year anniversary of England winning the World Cup for the one and only time. I do get your point that that they have been winning ugly, winning games they maybe didn't deserve to win. I don't think they've got the. I think if Erling Haaland plays to his best and Norway get him chances in the box, I don't think England can defend him. And I think Argentina just have too many good players. And now, admittedly, they had a poor game against Egypt. They had a pretty dodgy game against Cape Verde before that, but I think Argentina will come good in the end. And my personal feeling is it's probably going to be a France-Argentina game in the final at the end. And I think if Erling Haaland plays to form and they get the ball to him in the box, I don't think England can defend him. Pat McLaughlin, Norway 2 with 2 for Haaland, 1 for England with Harry Kane. Very interesting. Certainly 2 of the best strikers in the world. And if you look at their goal scoring records and goals per game and goals per minute and everything, obviously both Kane and Haaland have scored at all levels in England. They've scored in Europe. Harry Kane's been a brilliant success playing for Bayern Munich. Harry Kane and Haaland have scored an absolute ton of goals internationally. Harry Kane's actually come through on several occasions this World Cup to score vital goals for England. So I think personally, if Norway play to form and get the ball to Haaland in the box, I think that's a pretty likely score, 2-1 to Norway. But with the way things are with referees and VAR and so on, goodness only knows. And also, we've now found out that Harry Kane and Donald Trump are golfing buddies as well. So maybe that has an influence on things as well. Thank you very, very, very much, Slabber and Cabbage. It's an extremely generous £5 donation. As I say, what I do with any money that the channel makes is I put it into a wee fund to buy better quality equipment for the channel. So the next thing we're planning to buy for the channel is a better camera, and then maybe when we get to Christmas time and I've earned a wee bit more money through the channel, we can then look to maybe upgrade the live streaming software. At the moment, we've got a very, very basic live streaming software that I use. But maybe Santa Claus will give me that for Christmas. Thank you very much, San Fran Celtic. As I say, everything I do is entirely free of charge, but it's incredibly generous. I'm really, really humbled and blown away by anyone thinking that I'm worth that sort of money. So thank you so much for spending your hard-earned cash. Oh God! To be fair, Slabbering Cabbage, comparing me to Nigel Farage is actually the worst possible thing If there are very, very few people in the world that I hate, and he and Donald Trump are number 1 and number 2 on the list. Buckfast on David tonight, yes. Well, and to be thoroughly honest, despite for the fact that I actually lived and worked over in the Coatbridge Airdrie area of Scotland for a year or so when I was younger, never actually tasted Buckfast. I've got no idea what Buckfast tastes like, but I dare say lots of you out there know what it tastes like. It's not a drink I've actually ever had. As I say, Buckfast was a really, really popular drink with other people when I lived over in the Airdrie Coatbridge area for a year or so. Really good point, Gavi boy. That I actually I was really, really surprised. Obviously, it was his birthday a couple of days ago, Virgil van Dijk. I couldn't believe he was 35. I thought he actually was still playing pretty much at his best or near his best last season for Liverpool. He still looks one of the best central defenders in the world, but he is actually 35 years old. So, also quite a lot of rumours that he's looking to move away from Liverpool this summer. I think obviously be quite a big hole in the Liverpool team if they lose 2 of their most experienced best defenders at the same time, with Andy Robertson obviously moving on from Liverpool to go to Spurs. And say a lot of stories that Virgil van Dijk's looking to leave Liverpool this summer. Thank you very, very much, San Fran Celtic. A one-man marathon man. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad that you do it. Love the show. That's really, really very, very generous of you. In essence, I really enjoy doing what I'm doing. I really enjoy people having fun. I really enjoy talking about Celtic. I really enjoy sharing opinions, seeing what other people think of different players. As I say, a lot of my opinions, a lot of my thoughts about Celtic and about football aren't the same as other people's. I do have immense faith, immense faith in Martin O'Neill. Have a lot of faith in the Celtic Football Club and the Celtic fans. Celtic very, very financially secure at the moment. Part of that's down to the money men, the Nicholsons, the Mackays, etc. We have had unprecedented domestic success. Definitely, Europe is the next one. Is where we need to be aiming for. It was very, very, very disappointing that we didn't build on the success of knockout stage 2 seasons ago by going as far or one step further last season. I think with a few additions to the squad and keeping a few of the players who are potentially leaving the club this summer, I think we really could mount a campaign to get to the knockout stage or into the last 16. Yes, Paul Boy, the subscriber numbers are gradually going up and up and up. We're into the 1700s. I'm hoping to get to 2,000 by Christmas. That would be a brilliant target. Thank you, Michael Ross, saying one of the best Celtic pod on the planet. I'm not sure how much of that is sarcasm and irony, etc., but I'll take the compliment. And as long as people are enjoying themselves, as long as everyone's having a nice discussion and debate, and as long as everyone's being nice and polite and respectful, etc., I'm happy. Fair enough. As I said, the football is a matter of opinions, and I've got my opinions. You've got your opinions. Sometimes it's the same opinion, quite often it's different opinions, and I just do my best to say say what I think, say what I feel, and why I feel those things. Oops. Gary Sutherland 9715. Is there any news on Lennon Miller moving to Celtic? I honestly haven't seen anything about Lennon Miller moving to Celtic. I think that would be a brilliant signing for Celtic. I think he would be the perfect player for Celtic to bring in to back up McGregor and so on, and become more and more of a strong influence in midfield. I think it's a real shame that Lennon Miller chose to go and play in Italy rather than coming to Celtic. I think he actually would have been far better in terms of a long-term career to have come to Celtic rather than going to Udinese in Serie A. I'm not convinced a player that young has got the ability to move to Italy and really, really do well. Obviously, players like McTominay, Gilmore, Che Adams, Lewis Ferguson, all are considerably older when they move to Italy. I think you certainly need to be into your mid-late 20s before you can move from Scotland to across to Italian football. So I think in terms of his career progression, it would have been far better for him to have come to Celtic for a few seasons and then move to England or Italy or whatever after that. Maybe Udinese might loan him to Celtic for a season, but if Celtic were able to get Lennon Miller to come back to Scotland, then that would be a brilliant move. As I may have said before on live stream, the couple of my relatives who live over in the Motherwell area knew Lennon Miller from school, and according to friends of theirs who were also friends of Lennon Miller, he was very much against going to Rangers or going to Celtic. He wanted to move out of Scotland. He didn't want to carry on playing in Scotland. Whether he's changed his mind, having had a disappointing spell in Italian football, maybe he should come back. Haven't actually, so San Fran Celtic saying that Lennon Miller's dad drives him round the bend. Haven't actually heard his dad talking on TV or radio recently. He was actually, when his son was having a particularly good time playing for Motherwell, he actually was on the TV and the radio rather a lot. I haven't actually seen him recently. It may be actually because the Lennon Miller and his family were incredibly close. Maybe his dad's actually gone across, spending a lot of time with his son across in Italy. Gordon Flowers, Pat, if you can't get a team like Portugal playing good football, you're never going to do it anywhere else, especially domestically. Yeah, certainly Roberto Martinez had a pretty good record with Belgium, a pretty good record with Portugal, but didn't really get either of those two teams to take that next step forward. He had okay career as a manager in English football, kept Everton up in the Premier League, did win Wigan's one and only trophy ever. He is out of work. I don't. There was quite a lot of stories that he might be coming to Celtic with obviously the links with Sean Maloney, his ex-assistant manager. Yep. Ernest Mosley Lennon Miller lost his mum when he was about 12 or 13 years old. He's got like 3 or 4 brothers and sisters. So he and his dad had quite a lot of. So basically, Lennon Miller had to kind of grow up very quickly to be the big brother and help his dad out with the other 3 or 4 kids. Yep, Gavi Boy, inside knowledge with Kettlewell and Frail, saying they had a really unbelievable player at Motherwell, which was Lennon Miller. No, certainly he, incredible player, and was definitely a player who was good enough to play first team football as a real pivotal part of the team at 17, 18 years old. At Motherwell, he was probably Motherwell's best player for the whole of his proper career at Motherwell. I think he probably was a player more than capable of stepping up from playing for Liverpool, playing for Motherwell to play for Celtic. It's a disappointment that he chose to go to Italy. I think he, much probably like Engels moving down to England or Italy or whatever, I think for him it'd be a season or two too early to do that. I do think you need to be that bit more mature before you move into one of the strongest leagues in the world. I don't think Lennon Miller was mature enough or experienced enough as a player to be a dominant player in Italian football. Also, obviously, when he left Motherwell to go to Udinese, he was in and around the Scotland squad. And because he wasn't playing on a regular basis in Italy, he lost his place in Stevie Clark's squad, and then he lost out rather surprisingly to Darren Fletcher's son when they had to replace Billy Gilmore at the last minute. Kieran Allen suggesting Sparrow from Motherwell for cover on the wings and wing-back areas. Certainly he was very impressive, I thought, in the games Celtic played against Motherwell last season. Did pretty good, pretty decent as a defender. Able to play the right wing-back role, the inverted full-back role. Again, he was another player that Motherwell signed for next to nothing or on a free transfer. So not quite sure how much Motherwell would want for him. I think he would be a decent backup to Alison Johnston. I think he would give us some of the skills that Alison Johnston gives us. Obviously, Alison Johnston's a considerably better player. Unfortunately, the stories linking us and Julian Araujo seem to have completely gone away. Although at the moment it doesn't look like his career is going anywhere, i.e. he still seems to be based at Bournemouth and no one's really come in for him with a bid, although reportedly he wanted to go to Mexico or go back to play in America. His wage demands probably would have put him outside of Celtic's general wage structure, in that he was on about £70,000 a week in Bournemouth, which is well over. So goodbye to you, Slabber and Cabbage. Nice to have had you on. Thank you so much for your very, very generous gift. Wee bit of an early birthday present for me, because it's my birthday in a few days' time. Yep, Belfast Irish Celt. Orojo was a wee belter. Only had him for a few months, but he bought into the club for big time. He had a lot of skill, a lot of energy. He was a really good tackler. He was a very combative, aggressive player. He was for me nearly as good as Alison Johnston. Alison Johnston for me brings all those same skills. I think Alison Johnston's just probably a wee bit better as a defender, a wee bit better in the final third in terms of creating chances and stuff. I think if we had Araujo and Johnston as our two right backs, backed up by Colby Donovan as the young developing player, I think we would be very, very well blessed at right back. Assuming that Alison Johnston stays at Celtic for another season, my guess is we're probably going to go with Donovan, Ralston and Johnston as our three right backs. But Michael Meehan, Celtic missed out on Alfie Devlin. He was expecting to end up at Celtic. That's what he wanted. Something fell down in the process. Well, there's from what I've read, there's contrasting stories. There certainly were a couple of stories suggesting that Alfie Devlin was very keen to come to Celtic. There were also quite a lot of stories that Alfie Devlin was keen to go back to Preston, which is where he'd been playing on loan the season before. He was the young player of the season for Preston. The previous that's on that loan season. So there are contrasting stories. My understanding is that Devlin was very keen to go back to play for Preston in the English Championship rather than coming to Celtic. I think he maybe felt that playing in the English Championship made him much more in the shop window for other English clubs. So I dare say his plan probably is a season or two at Preston and then transferring back into the English Premier League in his early mid-20s. But see, there were strong stories. There were strong stories that Devlin was wanting to come to Celtic. As I say, I read it on one of the Spurs fan sites that Devlin's first choice was coming to Celtic for the European football, and then literally 3 or 4 hours later, stories started coming out to say that Devlin had opted to go to Preston. He's going for his medical at Preston. He was about to sign for Preston. So quite what the truth is, I don't know. But you're quite right. There were strong stories about him wanting to come, and then there were equally strong stories that his first choice was Preston, and then as it turned out, he went to Preston. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think really Alfie Devlin would have had any particular links to come to Celtic. Let's see, he apparently did have a very, very happy, successful season at Preston the season before on loan. So, so Paul Boysing, did I see that the Shelbourne man of the match got a chainsaw? I didn't see that. I didn't see that live. I didn't see that live on the coverage on Premier Sports 2, but I certainly saw lots and lots of photographs from various different Celtic websites and Irish newspapers and so on. So it did seem rather bizarre that the man of the match got a chainsaw. I dare say that must come down to whoever sponsors Shelbourne or sponsors their man of the match award. It was very interesting. I thought Alfie Devlin looked a very, very decent player. Played for Spurs at a very, very young age. Played when he was like 16, 17 for the first team in a cup match. I think it was against Margate. Career was kind of sort of dawdling along. Then he went to Preston, had a really, really very good season for Preston on loan. Then like 8 goals, 6 assists. Was their young player of the year. And it looks like he chose to go back to the club he knew rather than taking the risk of coming to a new country, a new club, much higher profile club. So maybe he felt that he wasn't quite ready to come and play for a high profile, high pressure club. Maybe he wanted a couple of seasons playing in the Championship in England before either moving to another European country or coming to Scotland, or if things went very well from at Preston, going back to play for another team in the top league. So Pat McLaughlin suggesting that Hamish, I presume Hamish Carton on the Celtic AM channel, saying that Donovan is going to get put out on loan next season. I would be very disappointed if Celtic loaned out Colby Donovan. I'd be much happier seeing Colby Donovan if Johnston got injured again this season upcoming. I'd be much happier seeing Colby Donovan as being our first choice backup right back rather than Anthony Ralston. Anthony Ralston, a good, dependable player, but for me, he's not. I think Colby Donovan's already a better right back than Anthony Ralston, and I think Donovan's going to get better and better. He's also got the benefit of being about 6 foot tall in height, so which is also useful for Celtic's defence. Gordon Flowers, right winger at Millwall, called Aziz, very good, who can't compete with the Championship wages. Certainly, the amount of money that the Championship in England gets from Sky, etc., does put them as having the 7th highest TV contract in the world. So, i.e., the English Championship's TV contract is considerably more than most European countries' #1 league. So it kind of puts the English Championship a wee bit behind the Spains and Germanys and Italys and Englands and France for TV contract money. So there is an absolute fortune going around in the English Championship in terms of prize money, but also Michael Meacham saying Devine held up his Preston contract deadline as he thought Celtic were sorting his future. Well, that's I hadn't heard that story. My understanding was that Preston were trying to work out how they were going to get the money to pay the transfer fee that was as part of their loan deal with Spurs. However, as I say, I haven't read that. Could well be true. I don't know. I haven't read that story. My understanding was that Preston were struggling to find the money to pay the basic transfer fee and the wages, etc., for Devlin, but for Devine, sorry. But who knows? Haven't seen any confirmation of that. Haven't seen anything to suggest that Celtic had a definite chance to sign him. Certainly, O'Neill liked him. Maloney liked him. I think there were negotiations, but I don't think it got any further than that. And plenty of stories I read suggested that Devine always wanted to go to Preston, having been there before. But I don't know. I've got absolutely no inside knowledge. All I do is read the stories or read some of the stories. Good point, San Fran Celtic. If Callum goes to Saudi, how much should we expect to get for him? Given the fact that we're selling him to the Saudi League, which has got millions of money, and also the fact that he's got 2 years left on his contract at least, and that Celtic don't want to sell him, I think Celtic could ask for pretty much anything they like. £10 million, given the fact that he is a player in his early 30s with injury problems. But much like selling a player to England or selling a player to many clubs in Europe, you think of a number and double it. But I don't see Callum McGregor leaving Celtic. I suspect that a man who's got obviously young family, etc., moving your whole family to Saudi Arabia, very, very big culture shock, massive culture change for his kids and his wife and so on. I know he would get paid an absolute fortune for a couple of years to play across in Saudi, pretty much tax-free, etc. Then there's quite a lot of restrictions about coming back to Scotland or coming back to Britain, which obviously was a factor for Jordan Henderson and for Steven Gerrard coming back to work in Britain. It does kind of put a lot of restrictions on your ability to come back to Britain if you've had big tax-free earnings in Saudi or that region. Good point. Belfast Iris said, wouldn't it be mad if Kalmak did go to Saudi for big money? I've been calling for the last couple of years for Celtic to find somebody to develop to be Callum McGregor's replacement. Obviously, if we sold Callum McGregor at this point, we either would need to bring in a player as good as him, although probably about 5-10 years younger than him, to replace him, or try and develop someone who's already at Celtic to take over that role. As I say, it doesn't look like Hatate's staying, although as yet there don't seem to be any bids for him. Some people suggesting that Engels is going to stay for another season. Good point. San Fran Celtic, I think we've reached the end with Kalmack. Would leave a legend. Yeah, I think obviously he's into the top 10 all-time of Celtic appearances. He's probably number 2 and number 3 in the all-time trophies and medals won at Celtic as a player. He's obviously a few behind James Forrest. I think probably if Callum McGregor stays at Celtic for another 2 or 3 years, he'll overtake James Forrest's record of trophies and medals. He probably will get himself up into the top 4 or 5 or 6 of appearances of all time. He clearly, obviously, is not going to get anywhere near Billy McNeil's record of over 800 games for Celtic, but he certainly could get up towards the levels of Pat Bonner and Danny McGrain and Paul McStay, etc., and Roy Aitken, who are up in the top few. Wyoming CSC way too slow getting our business done as usual. Well, I agree that I would have hoped by this time that Celtic would have had a few more players in. One balancing factor with that could be that our expectation that we're going to lose a lot of players leaving the club this summer maybe isn't true. Maybe Martin O'Neill knows that certain players who are rumoured to be leaving have all agreed to stay at Celtic for one more season, or O'Neill knows that the board are not going to accept any transfer fees for certain players. We have actually refused gigantic bids for players a lot in the last few seasons. We turned down obviously gigantic bids for Engels multiple times last winter. We turned down lots and lots of bids for people like Kuhn and O'Reilly and Edward and Dembele and so on and so on and so on for many, many seasons before we eventually sold them. So maybe Martin O'Neill has inside knowledge, and I dare say he does because he's in charge of everything, that he knows that more players than are staying than leaving, and thus he doesn't have to replace quite so many players with new players. But I do take your point, and I do agree we're a wee bit behind where we should be or where we would want to be. I think as long as we have the bulk of our first team squad, so our starting 11 and our 8-9 subs in place and fit for a week or so before the Dundee match, which gives us another couple of weeks before the first European match, I think we'll be fine. I think one of the problems last season was the pre-season training. The pre-season friendlies didn't go very well. A lot of players joined the Celtic squad very late. The 2 Japanese players, Hatate and Maeda, joined the squad late. Carter Vickers joined the squad late because he'd had surgery during the summer. Also, Johnston was delayed coming back because Canada got to the last 4 of a Copa America. Then he got married and was away on honeymoon, so he came back very late to the squad. Plus, obviously, we got quite a few players in that last 3 or 4 weeks of the transfer window. So I think Martin O'Neill will have the squad and the team and the players fired up, ready, fitter, stronger physically and mentally, much more so than last season. And also probably try and get players into the squad who are already match fit and are just then needing to fit into Celtic, etc. As I say, the benefit with Camilo Duran was he'd had a full pre-season with Karabag prior to coming to Celtic, so he should be very much fit to start playing for Celtic as soon as he gets announced and gets his work permit and visas and everything agreed. But I do agree, Women's CSC, I think we are a bit behind where we would want to be. Although my own reading of the transfer markets around Europe and around Britain is a lot of teams are a week or two behind where they normally would be in terms of transfer dealings, partly I think because of the World Cup, and the bulk of the best players in the world are currently across in America, or were very recently across in America and Canada and Mexico. Yes, Gordon Flowers, I do agree. 1.5 years ago, we knew the positions needing strengthening. We're still waiting to fill these positions. I think that's partly true. I think Celtic did sign some players expecting them to develop and become better and better players. Some players who we've signed have turned out to be very disappointing. And I think Celtic did have a few players lined up to come in. And when we failed to qualify through that qualifier against Kairat Almaty to get into the Champions League, I think a few players who were lined up to come into Celtic, assuming that we got Champions League football, pulled out at the last minute because we failed to qualify past Kairat Almaty. Well, Anton Rogan's left foot, my memory might be wrong, but Martin O'Neill always brought a big player in at the end. I think in general terms, Martin O'Neill at Celtic in his 5 years as manager did a very, very good job in the transfer windows, signed a lot of very good players for Celtic. I think he also did a very good job of working out which players would fit in with other players and would fit into the squad. I think that's one of his strengths is the man management, the man motivation. I think he's very strongly aware of the psychology and personalities and all these kind of things. And I do think that's also a key factor of the players that he's bringing into Celtic. So I think partly coming back to Gordon Flowers' point, I think Celtic have tried to bring in players, some of whom haven't worked out, a few of whom have moved on. But I would totally agree that we never properly replaced Kyogo when we sold him to Rennes, which did leave us for many parts of last season rather short of striking options. The fact that Johnny Kenny at one point was pretty much our one and only fit striker apart from Dies and Maeda did mean that we were kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel with Osman being injured, Kelechi Iheanacho being injured, etc. Shinya Maeda not really settling into Scotland. Gavi Boy saying the board's never filling positions before the player leaves. Well, part of the criticism of Celtic has been they have signed quite a lot of players with potential, development players, etc. So I think Celtic have tried to sign players with potential that are going to get better and better. Some of them, if you think back a few years, and it's the same chief executive, it's the same board members, although a different chairman. We did bring in a lot of good players over previous years: Matt O'Reilly, Alistair Johnston, Rio Hatate, Kyogo, etc., etc. All those same players came in under the same ownership of Dermot Desmond, the same leadership of Michael Nicholson, and Mackay as the CFO and the CEO. Brian Wilson was on the board. He's now chairperson. Peter Lawwell's moved on. So a lot of the same people who were part of Celtic bringing in players like the ones I've just mentioned are still at Celtic. So they have had some successes in terms of bringing in players. They've also had some failures, but then pretty much every football team in the world has successes and failures. They can never quite predict which players are going to do well and which ones are not going to do well. So San Fran Celtic saying last season was the best in many years, and in his opinion, part of me wants a nervy close race again with a few teams involved, so we have more to watch out for. The other part wants us to romp it. What I would actually genuinely like for Scottish football next season, or this season coming, is for Celtic to be 2 or 3 levels ahead of everybody else. But teams like Rangers and Hearts and Motherwell and Hibs and Aberdeen and Falkirk, Dundee United, etc., are all very, very close to each other. Because I think actually if we can bring Scottish football as a whole up to better and better quality, it does make Celtic's job a bit easier, but also gives us harder games. But I want Celtic next season, or this season rather, coming to be a similar level of success and winning games and not losing many games, like we did in Postecoglou's second season, like we did for the most part in Brendan Rodgers' second season, where we won those 2 leagues rather easily. For the sake of Scottish football, another season like last season would be really good for bringing up the quality of Scottish football generally. It's going to be interesting to see how teams like Hearts and Rangers and so on get on in their European qualifiers, which will be starting very soon for those ones. Because we really do need, for the sake of Scottish football and Celtic's coefficient and Scotland's coefficient for European competitions, for other Scottish teams to do decently or half decently. Because it's been a long, long time for any other team apart from Celtic or Rangers has done anything of any note in Europe. And even then, both Rangers and Celtic have had quite a lot of European, very disappointing seasons. San Fran Celtic, it was electric. The cup final felt like a snooze fest. Certainly the cup final against Dunfermline was a wee bit of anti-climax. As soon as Celtic started well against Dunfermline, it was a foregone conclusion that Celtic were going to win. I do agree that the game against Falkirk, the first game of the post-split fixtures, was an exciting game. Celtic played well. Falkirk got back into the game. Celtic got another goal to guarantee the win. The game against Hibs was a very tight, nervy game. We ended up winning that 2-1. We then beat Rangers, which I thought was a really good performance in the second half. We then scraped a win against Motherwell with a dramatic last-minute penalty, and then I think we played poorly in the first half against Hearts, but we played really, really well in the second half and fully deserved to win that game and then win the title. So Anton Rogan's life, it's a business outlook. All they see is make a profit rather than chase it. That's a perfectly reasonable point of view. I think, as I've said a few times before, I do think the ambition to keep Celtic moving forward is there. After all, if you think the board people are only in it for the money, the better Celtic do in Europe, the better Celtic share price is, the better the sponsorship deals will be, the better the merchandising is going to be, the better the TV money is going to be, the more Celtic can sell their their product, their channel, their merchandising rights all around the world. So actually, if the better Celtic do, both in Scotland but also in Europe, it's better for the club in general. And if all they care is about the share price and the dividends and the profits, etc., the better Celtic do, the more profits Celtic will make. So I do think that the board, etc., are willing to spend money if we can convince people to come. And as I've said before, I think the fact that Celtic's wage budget has gone up and up and up and up, and it's now many millions more than Rangers' budget, does show a degree of ambition to get good players to the club, but also to try to keep those players at the club for as long as possible, or keep them in the longer term. People like McGregor, who's been at the club all his life, basically. And that's because Celtic's been a very good club for him, rewarding him on a regular basis with upgrades in his contract. And also the case, Celtic's rewarded a lot of their players, Maeda, Carter-Vickers, Johnston, etc., by giving them regular contract increases. And San Fran Celtic, I don't see Kyogo coming back to Celtic as a player. I can see him coming back in 5 years' time to do an appearance or do some kind of link up between Celtic and Japan. I don't see Kyogo ever coming back to Celtic to play as a football player. Anyway, just double checking to see if there are any new developing stories. Nothing very convincing in terms of all the various different rumours, but I'll have a look at those things overnight and probably do a wee video at some point tomorrow, prior to the weekend, just to update on just what's happening or not happening in terms of players coming in, players leaving the club, and also hopefully there's some clarification why there's been a bit of a delay with Camilo Duran being announced as a player. He seems to have been given the shirt number of 11 for next season. Cheers for the show, David. Some shift, yes. So it's getting on towards 1 o'clock in the morning. So I do think, as implied by San Fran Celtic, it's probably a good idea to call it a day. So thank you so much to absolutely everybody who has contributed. San Fran Celtic, Wyoming CFC rather, Dexter, Pat McLaughlin, earlier on, Slabbering Cabbage, Chipper67, everybody who has contributed, thank you so much as well. Belfast Irish Celt 32, some brilliant contributions this evening as well. Anton Rogan's left foot, Gavi Boy, some brilliant contributions for the last 4 hours, but I think it's probably time to call it a day and get off to our beds and have a rest. in preparation for the weekend. So thank you very much to everybody who has contributed. Thank you very much who's very, very kindly given me wee gifts. It makes things even more worthwhile. Everything I do is for free, but it's nice to get a wee gift from time to time. So thank you so much for that. Planning to do another live stream next Thursday. Nice comment to finish things on. Hail, hail the champions. We're going to be champions of Scotland at least for another 10 months or so, until next May at the very least. And I'm very, very certain next May we will be celebrating another championship. And to say thank you very much, Michael Ross. In a few days' time, it will be my 59th birthday. So I'm looking forward to a nice day for my birthday in a few days' time. So until next Thursday live stream, or until the next video that I do in the next day or two, goodbye and hail, hail.